Good evening, night owls, and welcome to Whisper Crowley. Tonight, I will guide you into a world of darkness, hoping to help you relax and unwind. Perhaps some of you will even drift into a haunting yet soothing sleep. Before we begin, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. And now, we begin. I was born in a small coastal town called Maplewood, nestled between rolling hills and the vast Atlantic. From childhood, I lived with my parents in a modest neighborhood of narrow streets and houses so close together, you could almost reach out your window and touch your neighbor's wall. Everyone knew each other by name in our tight-knit community. My father worked as a commercial fisherman, spending days out at sea with his crew. My mother, Grace, was a skilled seamstress who altered clothes for local women and helped create wedding dresses for brides throughout the region. We weren't wealthy, but we never went without the essentials: rice, beans, fresh vegetables from our backyard garden, and occasionally some fish my father would bring home when the catch was good. I remember sitting on a makeshift bench by our front gate, one my father had crafted from reclaimed driftwood. I'd watch the street activity every evening as neighbors chatted animatedly, sharing stories about relatives, home remedies, and gossip from the latest church fundraiser. Mom would say that such gossip was inevitable in small towns, and advised me not to pay too much attention to everything I heard. Still, I was fascinated by how people's lives intertwined. Everyone knew everyone else's business. If someone had a problem, the entire neighborhood would soon know about it, and in many cases, rush to help. When I was around 5 years old, my mother enrolled me in a little school just 3 blocks from our house. That's where I met Heather, a girl who, from the first moment, showed herself to be outgoing and full of energy. She had a wide smile, wore her hair in long braids, and seemed to want to embrace the world. We became inseparable. In Maplewood, there weren't many entertainment options, so we invented our own games: hopscotch, spinning tops, and hunting for seashells along the shore. Our parents were happy to see our friendship blossom. Dad would even say he saw Heather as his honorary daughter, since she spent more time at our house than her own. As the years passed, our friendship grew stronger. During adolescence, we began to notice the changes in our bodies. However, I didn't develop as much as other girls. While Heather and some classmates displayed wider hips and more prominent busts, I remained petite, very skinny without pronounced curves. At first, I tried to hide my discouragement, but over time, it truly bothered me. I'd look in the mirror and wonder why I didn't have the same feminine contours I saw in others. In Maplewood, people were somewhat conservative, so plastic surgery or cosmetic procedures weren't openly discussed. Still, I secretly dreamed about the possibility of someday enhancing my breasts. "You're exaggerating, Lily," Heather would say when I confided in her. "Your body is beautiful just as it is, and if you're not satisfied when you're older, maybe you can do something about it." She seemed understanding, and I felt I could trust her, sharing all my secrets and aspirations. We reached high school, increasingly aware of our desires and insecurities. I was working part-time helping Mom with sewing, doing hems and small repairs, saving every dollar I earned. Occasionally, Dad would give me financial help, knowing my dream of studying out of town or even changing my appearance. He was loving, but always said I should prioritize education since plastic surgery was secondary. Nevertheless, he supported me, even if cautiously. Heather and I finished high school, and around 18, we started thinking about the future. In Maplewood, job options were scarce. Many young people moved to larger cities like Boston or New York in search of work. I had a cousin named Mike who lived in Seattle and always said there were many opportunities there. He told me about a family looking for a nanny for 2 young children. The salary wasn't huge, but it included room and board and some stability, a way for me to save money for surgery if I wanted. When I told Heather, she seemed enthusiastic, but I noticed a strange look in her eyes. She said she would miss me terribly, that she would feel the absence. I asked if she also wanted to try something outside of Maplewood, but she changed the subject, claiming her parents wouldn't let her live far away. In the end, my cousin managed to speak with the Seattle family. I did a phone interview, and they liked me. So at 19, I left with a heavy heart, leaving behind my parents and my grandmother Alina. Grandma was very religious, saying the rosary every day and hanging small religious pictures all over her walls. Before I left, she kissed my forehead and placed a medallion around my neck. "Go with God, my child, and don't forget to pray before sleeping. Don't worry, Grandma. I'll take care of myself." I took a cross-country bus to Seattle, a journey of almost 2 days. Upon arrival, I met my cousin Mike, who took me to the family that had hired me. They were called Cynthia and Marshall, with 2 boys aged 3 and 5. Their house was quite comfortable in a middle-class neighborhood, with a security gate and paved streets. I was impressed because I had never lived in such a place. Cynthia welcomed me with a warm hug and showed me to my room, simple but cozy, on the upper floor. I left my small suitcase there. The first day was a mixture of nervousness and hope. I was starting a path that could give me the means to fulfill my dream of getting breast implants. Time in Seattle passed quickly. Cynthia and Marshall were good employers, and I tried to care for the children with affection and responsibility. My routine included taking them to and from preschool, bathing them, and preparing snacks. Sometimes I would study English from an old notebook I'd brought, as I'd heard it could open doors. On weekends, if I had time off, I would go downtown to walk around, visit shops, and observe the bustle of the big city. This filled me with enthusiasm because I wanted to grow in life. Heather and I talked on the phone or exchanged messages almost every day during those first few months. She said she still hadn't found anything in our hometown and was considering coming to Seattle too, but it wasn't definite. Every time I mentioned being happy or shared a new experience, she would respond politely, but with a slight tone I couldn't decipher, a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. A little over a year later, with the money I'd saved, I realized I was close to having enough for breast implant surgery. My parents even offered to help with part of it if needed. Around this time, I told Heather, who suddenly began avoiding the subject. It was strange because she had always supported me. I didn't know if she was worried, envious, or simply insecure about me, but I didn't pay much attention. I had already contacted a clinic in Seattle, where I would have the initial consultation. I felt proud because I was about to realize a desire that had accompanied me for years. 3 months before I scheduled the surgery date, Heather called saying she had important news, but wouldn't reveal what it was. She only asked that I come to Maplewood the following week, because it would be our former elementary school teacher's birthday, and the whole town was throwing a surprise party. I asked for time off from Cynthia and Marshall's house, and they agreed. I took the bus back to my hometown. It was nice to see the family again and eat Mom's cooking. On the day of the party, I reunited with Heather. She looked different, thinner, with her hair loose and full of copper highlights, wearing a blouse that showcased larger breasts. I couldn't help but notice. Before I could even ask, she dropped the bombshell. "I got the surgery, Lily. I got implants a month ago." "Wow, how is it that you didn't tell me anything beforehand?" Heather just smiled somewhat awkwardly and said an opportunity had come up to travel to Portland because of a distant cousin, and she ended up doing everything there in a rush. That smile of hers, once so luminous, now seemed to carry a hint of bitterness. I was surprised and at the same time upset because she had done it in secret, knowing how significant it was for me. She merely said it was a last-minute thing, and she didn't want to bother me. Throughout the party, with superficial hugs and conversations, I remained uneasy, feeling something strange but unable to name what it was. I returned to Seattle with the sensation that Heather was hiding something from me. I continued with my surgery plans without letting it affect me. During this time, my mom and dad came to visit me a week before the operation. They even arranged a preoperative exam at another clinic to ensure everything would be fine. That same week, Heather called me nonstop, saying if I wanted, I could have the surgery at the same place she did in Portland, claiming the doctor was excellent and that I should reconsider doing it in Seattle. She spoke insistently, almost obsessively. "Heather, thanks for the suggestion, but I've already arranged everything here. I like the surgeon I chose. Aren't you afraid something might go wrong? My doctor is more experienced. I'm at peace. I've done several tests and made my decision." After hanging up, a pang of discomfort dominated my chest. It wasn't fear of the surgery, but a kind of alert about Heather's behavior. I didn't understand why she wanted so much for me to change my plans. The big day arrived. I entered the clinic early, accompanied by my mother. The doctor and team were super attentive. I remember lying on the gurney, wearing the hospital gown and waiting for the anesthesia. My heart was racing, but I repeated mentally that everything would be fine. I woke up several hours later with pain and discomfort, but also a strange euphoria at having finally achieved my dream of enhancing my breasts. The surgeon said everything went well and recommended rest, wearing a surgical bra and taking the prescribed medications. I spent the first week in Seattle at Cynthia and Marshall's house, recovering gradually. Mom stayed with me almost the entire time, helping me bathe and eat until I felt better. A few days later, Heather called me. "So, Lily, how are you? Recovering?" "It's painful, but I'm happy with the result." "Look, I don't want to discourage you, but be careful, okay? I know many people who got implants and then had complications. I'll follow the medical guidelines. Thanks for your concern." Something in her voice left me anxious, as if instead of being happy for me, she was hoping something would go wrong. I preferred not to prolong the conversation. I rested for a few more days and gradually returned to my routine of caring for the children. Cynthia and Marshall were very solicitous, adapting some tasks for me and saying that if I needed more time, it would be fine. That month, I experienced some strange episodes. One night, I woke up breathless, in a cold sweat, with the sensation that someone was standing beside my bed watching me. I searched the room frantically, turned on the light, but there was nothing abnormal. I imagined it might be the effect of the medication, and tried to go back to sleep. On another night, I heard a kind of knock at my bedroom door. I opened it to find no one in the hallway. Cynthia and Marshall were in their beds, as were the children. I didn't mention it to them, for fear of seeming paranoid. When I was cleared to do some external activities, I decided to visit the surgeon for a review. He said everything was healing well. I was radiant. On the way back, I received a message from Heather. "I want to see you. I'm coming to Seattle next week." I confirmed that I could meet her at a cafe, but at the last minute she canceled, citing family health problems. This increased my suspicion. That same night, shortly after 9 o'clock, she called me crying, saying she had a fever, feeling unbearable pain in one of her breasts, and that her implant seemed to be rupturing. I felt my heart race. "For the love of God, Lily, I'm so scared." Her voice trembled. "It seems like the doctor put something wrong in me. I don't know what to do." "Calm down, Heather. If it's that bad, go to the emergency room immediately. Call your parents or a friend to accompany you. I didn't want them to know yet. Please don't tell anyone." The conversation dragged on, but in the end, she promised to seek help. I went to sleep disturbed, worried about her situation. I also felt a strange relief that so far my surgery was going well. However, over the following weeks, I began to have chills and a sensation of weight on my shoulders, as if something was accompanying me. I started having nausea and numbness in my arms, without medical explanation. New tests revealed nothing abnormal. Still, my energy seemed drained. At this point, my grandmother Alina decided to come to Seattle to visit me, saying she had felt in her heart that I wasn't well. She was a simple woman of deep faith. When she arrived, she found me pale and weak. She told me she had spoken with a healer from Maplewood, an old woman named Ms. Ruth, known for strong prayers and traditional blessings. "Child, do you believe in these things like the evil eye?" asked Grandma, while serving me chamomile tea in the kitchen. "I don't know, Grandma. I never really believed in it, but I'm feeling strange." "Then let me take you to her." What harm could it do? That weekend, we took the bus and returned to Maplewood, temporarily leaving my job behind. Upon arrival, we went straight to Ms. Ruth's house on the outskirts of town. Entering her yard, I smelled burning herbs, and the environment was full of plants and religious images. "Ms. Ruth received me with a calm nod and asked me to enter a room with lit candles in a corner. "Sit here, child. You've been very weak. Yes, it's an inexplicable fatigue, and I've had occasional fevers too. Bring that basin with water, Alina," she asked my grandmother. "Let's see if we can discover something." She began a silent prayer, dipping sprigs of rue in the water and passing them lightly over my arms. At a certain point, she threw the sprigs into the fire of a thick candle burning in the middle of the room. The smell was bittersweet, a mixture of incense and burning leaves. Then she signaled for me to close my eyes. I felt a strange pressure in my chest, as if something was squeezing me from inside. "You carry a shadow of envy, child. Someone very close wants to see you in a bad situation. But who? I murmured, still with my eyes closed. I can't say for sure, but it's something heavy. She continued the prayers and recommended an herb bath in the following days, as well as asking me to remove any objects, memories, or ties with people who might be wishing me harm. At that moment, I thought of Heather, but the idea that she really wanted to harm me seemed absurd, despite the signs of estrangement. I returned to Seattle feeling a little better, more confident. I remembered that I kept in a small box some costume jewelry and mementos that Heather had given me in adolescence. I went to my room, opened the bottom of the wardrobe, and took out the box. As I handled the necklaces and rings, I noticed there was a very strange pendant that I didn't remember having seen before. It was a small eye carved in dark metal, with some nearly illegible inscriptions. A shiver ran through me. I remembered that once Heather had given me a protection charm, but I had never paid attention to the details. Without hesitation, I put everything in a plastic bag and threw it away in the condominium dumpster. That same night, I received a call from Heather's father, Mr. Wilson. He spoke in a contained manner, but you could hear the desperation in his voice. Lily, sorry to call so late, but Heather is hospitalized. She was rushed to the hospital. The doctor mentioned a serious infection in the implants. Do you know if she has any previous complications? My God, Mr. Wilson, I don't know. She only mentioned feeling pain, but didn't give details. Well, they're thinking of removing the silicone to prevent the infection from spreading. I hung up the phone with the feeling that something truly serious was happening. The next day I tried to call Heather, but she didn't answer. I spent days in agony until finally, she called me back, her voice tearful. Lily, I had to remove the implants. I have necrosis in part of my breast. My God, I'm so sorry, Heather. I don't know what to say. Everything went wrong for me. Why did it work for you and not for me? Calm down. Each body reacts differently. What does the doctor say? I'm not talking about medicine. I'm talking about... Oh, Lily, I did something stupid. I sought out people who deal with bad things to hinder you. It was out of envy, out of anger at seeing you happy. But now I can't sleep. I'm truly sick. I was silent for a few seconds, processing that confession. There had always been a strong bond between us. But hearing that the person I considered almost a sister had resorted to some kind of witchcraft to sabotage me was something I could never have imagined. I'm sorry, she repeated. I know nothing justifies it, but I couldn't bear to see you going to Seattle, making plans, achieving everything I wanted. Heather, you know how much it hurts me to hear this. I know, and I'm paying the price, see. I lost the implant, my health is weakened. I just wanted you to forgive me. I don't know if I can forgive you now. Maybe in the future, who knows? I hung up in shock. I curled up in bed, crying, trying to understand how someone who knew my most intimate dreams could turn against me like that. I told everything to Grandma Aliner, who advised me to keep my distance. If she repented, let her seek her own healing, but don't open the door to more envy. Gradually, I returned to normalcy in Seattle. I resumed my routine of caring for the children. As the months passed, I had new exams that confirmed my implants were firm, without complications. I saved more money, and even managed to change rooms in my employer's house. because they needed more space and offered me better conditions. I maintained brief contact with my parents and Grandma Alina, but avoided reaching out to Heather. She in turn remained silent. About 2 years passed. I moved to a small rented apartment near work because I judged I could now afford to live alone. I continued as a nanny for Cynthia and Marshall's children, and in my spare time, thought about starting a technical course or college. Then one night, I started having nightmares again. I dreamed I was lying down, and when I looked at the foot of the bed, I saw a female silhouette with long hair, wearing dark clothes, staring at me with resentment. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart racing. I checked doors and windows of the apartment, but everything was locked. Over the following weeks, objects slightly moved from place when I was absent, and I wasn't sure if it was the fruit of my imagination or something real. The atmosphere in the apartment became heavy, as if the air was denser. Once I came home from work and noticed a rancid smell coming from the living room, but there was nothing spoiled in the refrigerator or the trash. A strange oppression took over. I decided to call Grandma Alina, already distressed, and she recommended seeing Ms. Ruth again, or seeking some kind of blessing right there in Seattle. I mentioned the case to a neighbor named Maria, who was from Puerto Rico and practiced prayers and blessings. She offered to come to my apartment and do a kind of cleansing. We lit white candles. She passed rue in the corners of the rooms and prayed the Our Father while blessing me. I felt a burning sensation at the height of my breasts, where the scars from my surgery were. Maria frowned but finished the ritual, saying that if it was some negative influence, it might take time to dissipate completely. 2 days later, the atmosphere seemed lighter, and I slept well. However, it didn't last long. On the third night after the blessing, I woke up around 3 in the morning with pressure on my chest. It was as if someone was lying on top of me. I tried to raise my arms, but felt paralyzed. A muffled whisper sounded near my ear, calling my name repeatedly. When I finally managed to move, I screamed, turned on all the lights, trembling with my heart pounding. I realized I couldn't continue living like this, so I asked for time off work to travel to my hometown. I went straight to talk to Ms. Ruth. She received me with a serious look, took my pulse, and began to pray softly. She asked me to tell everything that was happening. I spoke of the nightmares, the sensations of strange presence. She made a sign that she understood. When envy is very great and mixes with negative forces, my child, the connection remains even if the person who sent it repents afterward. What should I do? Sometimes it's necessary to break any and all links. This includes physical and emotional memories. I've already thrown away some things she gave me. The cleansing needs to be complete. I returned to Seattle and decided to search for anything that might remotely have a connection to Heather. I reviewed photo albums, old letters, school notes that I still kept out of nostalgia. I put everything in a trash bag and burned it in the service area of the building, using an empty can with burning charcoal that I had asked the caretaker for. While watching the flames consuming those memories, I felt a pang of sadness. Heather, after all, had been a great friend. However, with each inch of burned paper, it was as if the air around became less dense, and I breathed better. Shortly after, the situation began to truly improve. I stopped having fevers. The night paralysis diminished. The lights in the apartment no longer failed. I went back to sleeping without nightmares. I continued my life, focused on my studies. I started a technical nursing assistant course and gradually left the painful experience behind. Whenever my parents called, I said I was fine, avoiding going into details about the terror I had lived through. Grandma Alina prayed for me, happy with my improvement. Some time passed. I received news that Heather had tried to reconstruct the affected breast, but the result wasn't very good. She distanced herself from almost everyone, including me. According to some acquaintances from Maplewood, she went through a phase of depression, but later started a family and moved to another state. I had no more direct contact, nor did I seek to know more. Sometimes I missed the good moments from childhood, but soon I would remember how much I suffered from that betrayal. I decided not to harbor resentment, as Grandma Alina once told me. Good only flourishes where there is no ground for hatred. So I continued. As the years passed, I saved money, changed jobs, worked in a pediatric office, specialized, and achieved a more stable place in the city. Today I live peacefully, but I look back and see how people can change, and how envy can sicken the heart of those who cultivate it. The mark of the surgery reminds me of everything I went through, the insecurity of the past, the effort to save money, the terror of almost losing my peace over something that should never have evolved to that point. I still believe there is an unknown component in the world, something we cannot explain by reason alone. Call it faith, spirituality, or mere superstition. The fact is that certain energies can affect us, and we need to be attentive, protected, and surrounded by true love. In the end, I learned not to ignore the signs, not to blindly trust those who don't demonstrate genuine reciprocity, and above all, to value those who stay by our side in health and sickness, in success and failure, without ulterior motives. I don't know where Heather is today, nor if we will ever meet again. If that happens, I hope we'll be different people, better for looking back, but keeping the lessons engraved in our souls. Hey everyone, thanks for listening. Click the notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I post new videos every day here. I hope to see you in the next ones. I hope you enjoyed the first story. If you did, don't forget to leave a like. But if I didn't do my job well, feel free to give it a thumbs down. Either way, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, let's continue. Good evening, dear listeners. My name is Michael Stepanenko, and I grew up in a small town called Crimson Valley, nestled among the mountains of western Pennsylvania. I still remember the church bells that rang every morning, the Johnson family butcher shop in the middle of Main Street, and the groups of men who gathered every evening in the square by the memorial to fallen miners. My father died when I was 13 years old, crushed in a mine collapse while trying to save his fellow workers. He couldn't get himself out in time. My mother, Alina, raised me and my older brother Victor by herself, earning a living through baking, which she sold at the local cafe. Childhood was difficult, but I enjoyed the tranquility of our town. As I grew older, I realized that Crimson Valley didn't offer many prospects, just work in the mine, at the sawmill, or in a few local stores. Most young people dreamed of leaving. When I turned 18, I decided to try my luck in Pittsburgh. I found construction work, starting as a helper, carrying bricks, mixing cement, doing whatever I was told. I worked 6 days a week and sent part of my salary back to my mother. This went on for 4 years. I lived in a tiny room that I rented with 2 Mexican guys. Despite the exhaustion, I didn't complain because I knew I was helping my family. When I finally returned to Crimson Valley, my mother already had serious health problems, heart issues, and joint pain. She could no longer work at the cafe. Victor had married and moved to Ohio, so I felt obligated to take care of her. I spent my savings on medicine and renovating a small addition to our house. That's when I met Anna, a girl from Florida who had come to stay with her aunt for the summer. She had such a genuine, radiant smile that it seemed like the sun rose every time she appeared. At first, we just talked on her aunt's porch, and later we started dating. Everything was very simple. Anna didn't have a permanent job, but she did catering during local festivals, while I took any work I could find in the area. I liked how she talked about the ocean, about flamingos at sunset, about her parents' large house with a veranda on the seashore. She always seemed happy, even in difficult times. After 2 years, we got married. We were just over 25, and we settled in a small house on the outskirts of Crimson Valley, near the road leading to the neighboring town. The view from there was wonderful: green hills, old oak trees, and a fresh breeze every morning. There was something special about waking up and seeing not concrete urban jungles, but the natural beauty of the Appalachians. Our life was peaceful and filled with small joys. Anna prepared homemade food that she sold to neighbors, and on weekends, she set up an improvised food truck in the town square. I worked for Tom Rivers' local construction company, doing everything from installing windows to roofing work. Although I was raised in a Catholic family, I rarely attended Mass. Anna wasn't very religious either, though she sometimes prayed before bed and said we should thank God for the blessings we received. Near our house, there was a converted barn where an evangelical church called Light of Salvation operated. Pastor Ryan was a charismatic man in his 40s who had arrived in town several years ago with the intention of saving souls by organizing emotional services every Sunday. I was never particularly interested in attending his church, but I saw that many neighbors regularly went to services. The community seemed close-knit, and they always invited everyone to join. In this environment, we met Clara, who had come from Texas and claimed she was called to help Pastor Ryan with missionary work. One day, Anna and I were at the grocery store when we heard Clara asking the owner if he knew of any apartments for rent. I remembered that an elderly woman from our neighborhood, Mrs. Margaret, had recently passed away, and her son was renting out her modest house. I gave Clara his contact information, and within a few days, she moved in. Clara was a woman with a distinctive appearance, long dark hair, always in elegant dresses of subdued colors, but tight enough to draw attention. From the first meetings, Clara made it clear that she was very dedicated to the church and wished to share biblical teachings with everyone around. I remained neutral, but Anna found common ground with her, perhaps because she sometimes felt lonely in our small town where she didn't have many friends. Gradually, Clara began to appear more frequently in our home. She brought fruits, vegetables, homemade pastries, and talked a lot with Anna, constantly touching on the importance of righteous living and avoiding sin. This didn't particularly bother me. I saw it as ordinary religious fervor. However, some of her statements disturbed me, such as when she said that God does not approve of people who turn away from the church. I made it clear to Anna that I had no intention of changing my way of life or faith. Time passed, and Clara became more and more involved in our lives. Once she offered to help Anna with her food truck on weekends, asking only that we attend a gathering at her church in return. I didn't want to go, but Anna went, probably out of curiosity. After this, I began to notice subtle changes in my wife's behavior. She talked more and more about maintaining purity, avoiding excesses, watching her words and actions so as not to disappoint the Lord. At first, I even found it interesting that she was striving for something new, but over time it became more intense. My mother, already elderly, noticed Anna's new influence. During one of my visits, she quietly said, "Son, be careful with these people who enter your home. Sometimes they're not what they seem." I just shrugged and replied that Clara seemed like a good person, just with a more fervent faith. My mother remained silent, but concern was evident in her eyes. After a few months, Anna began to experience constant nausea and fatigue. I thought she might be pregnant, but the test was negative. She complained of pains in her body, especially in her stomach and head. At my insistence, we went to the local clinic. The tests showed nothing. The doctors suggested it might be stress or poor nutrition and recommended rest. Unfortunately, our town had limited medical infrastructure. The clinic lacked modern equipment, and the only available doctor was a general practitioner. Although he ordered basic tests, they revealed nothing unusual. Despite her weakness, Anna continued preparing food for weekend sales, as we didn't want to lose the additional income. Clara came more and more often to help, preparing soups, washing dishes, staying late talking with Anna. Although I still found her somewhat intrusive, I appreciated the support because I was worried about Anna's health. Over time, I can't deny, I began to pay attention to Clara's body. Her curves seemed even more pronounced in those long dresses. I felt guilty for these thoughts, as Anna during that period was emaciated, without energy for almost anything. But my nights became confused. I dreamed about Clara while fearing that Anna's condition was worsening. It was an internal conflict that made me tense and silent. One evening, after an exhausting workday, I returned home and found Clara in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup. Anna was sleeping in the bedroom with a fever. Clara invited me to try the soup, and I felt a tremor when I saw her penetrating gaze. At that moment, our hands touched, and it affected me strangely, as if I were hypnotized. That same night, after Anna fell into a deep sleep, Clara and I remained talking in the living room. At a certain point, she came too close, and I didn't back away. I wiped sweat from my forehead, feeling guilt already beginning to pulse in my chest, but I gave in to desire. We began a physical relationship that couldn't be undone. In the days that followed, whenever the opportunity arose, Clara and I gave in to this sin, hiding from Anna. The situation was so absurd that sometimes Anna was lying in the next room, while I was betraying her in the living room. Deep down, I thought it was a temporary phase, a result of my despair over Anna's illness. but there was no moral justification that could absolve me. It was eating me up inside. Meanwhile, Anna's health only worsened. She became pale, without appetite. I took her to the clinic again, and the doctor ordered new tests, but said that if a diagnosis still couldn't be determined, we would need to refer her to a larger medical center in the neighboring town where specialists were available. However, due to constant underfunding at the clinic, authorization for treatment was delayed, bureaucracy upon bureaucracy. I was worried, but Clara, instead of supporting serious treatment, insisted that we should turn to prayer. I begged Anna to consult a specialist in the neighboring town, but she resisted, saying it was expensive and that God would help her. This attitude didn't match the practical and independent woman Anna had always been. With each passing day, I felt more entangled in a web. On one hand, I wanted to save my wife. On the other, I was enveloped in Clara's seduction. Almost a year passed in this tense atmosphere. My mother, increasingly frail, also began to need frequent care. I was torn between work, Anna's illness, and visits to my mother. In these moments, Clara played the role of savior, cooking, cleaning the house, praying. Although I was grateful for the practical help, I was filled with silent dread when I remembered our secret relationship. And even worse, my desire for Clara grew with each furtive encounter. One day, on a Saturday morning, Anna fainted while washing dishes. I rushed to help her and urgently took her to the hospital in the neighboring town. More sophisticated examinations diagnosed a serious disease of the lymphatic system, something that should have been identified earlier, but which the primitive equipment at our clinic couldn't detect. The doctor explained that the disease was at an advanced stage and that treatment would be difficult, but he would do everything possible to stop its progression. A feeling of helplessness overwhelmed me. When Anna slept in the hospital, I felt that everything around me was crumbling. I called Clara, who said she would pray and that God would give us strength. I felt anger because deep down, I blamed that religious discourse for delaying the search for specialist help. Anna stayed in the hospital for almost 2 weeks. The doctors tried everything, but her condition rapidly deteriorated. Clara came to the hospital every day, bringing broths and praying outside the room. I was torn between the pain of seeing Anna fading away and the confusion of feeling dependent on Clara's presence. After several treatment attempts, came the terrible news that nothing more could be done. I was desperate. On her deathbed, Anna held my hand with what little strength she had left and whispered, "Michael, I accepted Clara's faith. Don't be angry. I just wanted peace." These words struck me like a knife. She said she loved God and understood that He could receive her better. I was immersed in guilt, without the courage to confess what I had been doing while she was wasting away. 3 days later, Anna died. The funeral was organized by the evangelical church to which Clara belonged. Many people came to express condolences. Pastor Ryan gave a brief speech and read some verses from the Bible. I felt stunned, not knowing whether to cry, to scream, or to ask for forgiveness. In the end, my wife was buried as a faithful member of that congregation, something I could never have imagined until recently. In the days that followed, I sank into a deep grief, full of remorse. Clara, however, intensified her presence in my life. She insisted that I participate in services, claiming that only God's word would save me from darkness. Although I wasn't in the mood for religion, I followed her advice to avoid being alone, but also because, in a way, I craved her body, the feeling that someone cared for me, even if she was the cause of my torment. Contradictory and sick, that's how I felt. A month after Anna's death, I tried to resume intimacy with Clara. She began to evade, saying that now I needed to focus on redemption, and that she didn't want to mix things up. I felt abandoned, seized by an irrational desire to have her in my arms again, as if that was the only way to ease the pain of loss. However, Clara spent most of her time at church or engaged in other activities. Sometimes she appeared at my house, prayed, hugged me, but it didn't go beyond that. When I insisted, she retreated. One day I heard rumors that Clara had another man. My neighbor Leonard told me he had seen her in very close conversations with Pastor Ryan. At first, I didn't pay attention, as town gossips always spread stories quickly. But soon other comments emerged, saying that Clara had a dark past in Texas, that she had family there. My head was spinning. I approached Clara for clarification, but she became furious, saying she was a victim of slander, that I didn't trust her, and she distanced herself even more. My mother, though ill, remarked, "Michael, this woman is not what she seems. I've heard she's been up to things all around the area." I, with the guilt and pain of losing Anna, no longer knew whom to believe. I started drinking more than usual. I returned from work late with a feeling of emptiness and drank whiskey until I fell asleep. During this period, my childhood friend Martin, who knew my story, tried to warn me. "Michael, stay away from this woman. I can see you're destroying yourself from within." But I listened to no one. In a way, I still hoped Clara would want to be close. One day I decided to look for her at the rented house. I knocked on the door, but everything was dark. I asked a neighbor, who said she had left without explaining why. I was outraged that I hadn't been warned. I called her many times, but she didn't answer. In one of the calls, she finally picked up, but before I could say anything, she hung up. Despair overtook me. I started drinking every day, missing work, and stopped visiting my mother. Martin tried to bring me back to normal life, but I didn't respond. After 2 weeks, Clara unexpectedly returned, as if she had never disappeared. She knocked on my door with a smile, saying she had gone to resolve family matters and that she needed my understanding. We ended up in bed again, rekindling that fire which for me was a mixture of passion and dependency. After the act, she dressed and left. I tried to ask her to stay, but she claimed she had church obligations. I was left in a state of complete confusion, not knowing what to think or feel. My mother was noticeably deteriorating, and I was a terrible caregiver. I blamed Clara for distracting me, but deep down I knew the responsibility was mine. Concerned, Martin took me to the local healer, Mrs. Nadia, his grandmother, who performed cleansing prayers and rituals to remove bad energy. At first, I didn't believe in it, but I decided to try anyway because I was desperate. During the ritual, Mrs. Nadia passed a branch of mugwort over my body, prayed quietly, and finally sighed. "Son, there's very heavy energy on you. As if you've been tied, you understand." I shuddered. She asked if someone in my family had suddenly fallen ill, and I cautiously told her about Anna. Mrs. Nadia shook her head in denial, as if she had already expected something like this. She advised me to pray with faith, and, if possible, to stay away from any person who might have involved me in some kind of evil ritual. I left there stunned. Memories of sick Anna returned with force, and I felt like the worst of creatures. Images flashed through my mind of Clara cooking for my wife, offering teas, soups, and shortly after, Anna getting worse. I began to wonder if there could be something dark in all of this. At the same time, I had no evidence, and accusing Clara of poisoning or witchcraft seemed crazy. I fought with my thoughts, but they haunted me. Amid this mental chaos, I began to have recurring nightmares in which Anna looked at me with reproach and pain, while Clara appeared behind her, smiling ironically. I would wake up drenched in cold sweat, with a racing heart. I missed work days, and Tom, my boss, called me for a talk. I told him I had personal problems, and he, concerned, said I should take time to recover, because he didn't want to see me injured at work. This struck me even harder. Gradually, I tried to return to a certain routine. I stopped drinking, returned to work, but avoided talking about Clara. Martin and my mother supported me. I felt an enormous longing for Anna and visited her grave in the Crimson Valley Cemetery, bringing flowers. It was during these walks that I began to feel a certain peace, as if each tear that fell there cleansed my soul a little. However, one evening I heard light, persistent knocking at my door. I opened it, no one, just the cold wind blowing down the road and the street lamp flickering. I closed the door, troubled. Returning to the bedroom, I saw through the crack in the window what seemed to be a silhouette. I turned on the light, but saw nothing more. I remained uneasy. The next day, going out to work, I noticed a crumpled paper on the floor of the veranda. "Don't forget about me." There was no signature. The handwriting reminded me of Clara's, but I wasn't sure. Anxiety gripped me. I spent the whole day focusing on this. In the evening, I kept watch, expecting someone to appear, but nothing happened. However, in the middle of the night, the landline phone rang. I picked up the receiver and heard only heavy breathing from the other end. I asked who it was, but they hung up. I tried to go back to sleep, but couldn't. On the third day, I called Martin, asking for help. He came to my house, and we agreed that I would spend a few nights at his place, as his grandmother, Mrs. Nadia, was also worried about my mental state. I took only some clothes and documents. We spent a week in this routine, and no one appeared near my house, according to the neighbors. I thought about calling the police, but I had no real evidence of a threat. It was just a constant discomfort that caused me fear and suspicion. After a week, I decided to return to my house to collect the rest of my things. Upon arrival, I saw that the door was ajar. I entered with my heart in my throat. Someone had gone through the drawers. Everything was turned upside down. I found a note pinned to the wall with a nail. "I will make you pay for what you did." I felt a chill. I didn't know who had entered there. Could it be Clara? Someone from the church upset about Anna's death, or some other enemy I didn't even know I had. I called the police. An officer took notes and advised me to reinforce the locks. I had no idea who might be persecuting me. Each day I felt more paranoid, looking over my shoulder wherever I went. I began to avoid going out at night, fearing some attack. My mother no longer had the strength to advise me, and moved, she just prayed on her sickbed. One afternoon, returning from work, I thought I saw Clara in the distance, getting off a bus at the Crimson Valley bus station. I ran there but didn't find her. I asked the taxi drivers, and no one had seen her. I returned home frustrated, not knowing if it was all just my hallucination. I began to doubt my own sanity. I thought about consulting a psychologist, but was afraid of what I might discover. 2 nights later, I heard a familiar voice whispering outside the living room window. It sounded like Clara calling my name in a muffled way. I ran to see, but saw nothing. It was dark, and the street was illuminated only by the old lamppost. I grabbed a flashlight and went out, but found no sign of anyone. When I returned, I found a piece of fabric caught on the fence, as if someone had grabbed it to jump over. I kept this fabric, thinking of taking it to the police the next day. The following morning, as I was having coffee, I received a message on my cell phone from an unknown number. "Don't pretend you forgot about me. We need to talk." My heart froze. I replied asking who it was, but got no response. I set the phone aside, took my bicycle, and headed for the cemetery, as it was the day to visit Anna's grave. When I arrived, I came upon a woman in a long dress kneeling before the grave. My entire body trembled. I walked slowly toward her, without making noise. Then she turned and faced me. It was Clara. For an instant, I was speechless. She stood up, wiped away tears, and looked at me with an expression that mixed pity and superiority. Before I could say anything, she spoke. "Michael, I'm sorry for what happened to Anna. It wasn't my intention for things to end this way." I swallowed hard, with anger and confusion. I tried to question her, but Clara raised her hand. "Listen, I came here to pray for her spirit. I want you to know that I'm not to blame for anything. Her disease was beyond any intervention. I just wanted to help her." For a moment, I thought about screaming that she was a murderer, a manipulator, but I couldn't pronounce anything. Then I managed, and the notes, the threats, "Was it you?" She denied with a shake of her head, saying she had no idea what I was talking about, that perhaps someone wanted to harm me. She claimed she had only come to Crimson Valley to say goodbye, as she was leaving the country with her family. She said this without looking directly at me. At that instant, I heard the sound of a car starting near the cemetery gate. Clara looked back and appeared anxious. "I need to go," she whispered. I ran to try to prevent her from leaving, but she ignored me and hurried her pace. At the gate, a tall, burly man with a stern expression was at the wheel of an old pickup truck. He cast a hard look in my direction, as if challenging me to do something. Before I could act, Clara got into the truck, and the two sped away. I stood there, breathing with difficulty, hands trembling with anger and confusion. I returned to Anna's grave and knelt down. I touched the headstone, feeling a great weight in my chest. I didn't know whether to believe in Clara's innocence, didn't know if she was responsible for the messages and the chaos in my life, or if there was some other adversary involved. My legs felt weak, but I forced myself to stand and take another look around. No one, the cemetery was silent, except for the wind rustling the leaves of the trees. After this encounter, I received no more messages, nor did I find any more notes. Clara vanished like a ghost. The house she rented remained empty, Martin told me that, according to bar talk, Clara had been expelled from the local church along with Pastor Ryan, accused of embezzling money and having extramarital affairs. Others said she had family in Texas and that the man in the truck was her husband. Some rumors even spoke of witchcraft. With each story I heard, a piece of my sanity dissolved a little more. I decided to try to continue my life. I changed addresses, taking advantage of an empty room in a friend's house. I worked for Tom until I saved enough money to finally buy a small piece of land to build something of my own. My mother passed away shortly after, and once again I found myself at a funeral, trying to swallow the guilt of not having been a more present son. I visited Anna's grave every week, bringing flowers, asking for forgiveness. I promised myself that somehow I would honor her memory, that I wouldn't let her be just another victim of neglect and my mistake. Today, 5 years after all this, I still feel a lump in my throat when I remember Anna. Even though I'm working and moving forward, there hasn't been a single day when I haven't wondered if things could have been different if I had acted correctly. As for Clara, I never had any real news, just rumors that she might be acting in other congregations, perhaps repeating the same routine of seduction and manipulation. Sometimes I have nightmares where she appears at my door, smiling with those penetrating eyes. I wake up sweating, but fortunately see that it's just a dream. Be that as it may, I don't feel completely free. I carry the guilt of having betrayed the woman I loved, and of possibly having allowed the approach of someone who influenced her illness or perhaps contributed to aggravating the situation. It's something I will never be able to prove or undo. My only way to seek peace is to leave flowers on her grave and pray for forgiveness, asking that wherever she may be, she can forgive me for my sins. And it's also a reminder that sometimes the true terror is not in supernatural hauntings, but in the choices we make and the consequences they bring. Before we move on to the next account, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to receive the next stories. Your presence is important, and your support is essential. Well, let's continue. Good evening, everyone. My name is Charlotte, and I need to share something that still gives me goosebumps every time I remember it. Before I begin, I want to make one sincere request to all who hear this story. Never keep the ashes of a loved one inside your home. I know that for some, this might bring comfort, but what I experienced made me completely rethink this practice. For 18 years, I was married to Robert. We had a peaceful life in rural Maine, with a quiet routine, friendly neighbors, and many plans for our future. He was always my best friend, the kind of person whose smile could light up any room. Robert passed away about 14 months ago. When it happened, my world collapsed. I didn't have the strength to deal with his absence, so I decided to keep his ashes in a small wooden box that I placed on a specially made altar in our living room. I surrounded it with photographs of us together, candles that I would light occasionally, and sprigs of lavender, his favorite scent. At first, I thought this would bring me some comfort. It was as if part of him was still with me. But as the weeks passed, I noticed something different in the atmosphere of the house, a strangeness, almost tangible, hanging in the air. It felt like some invisible spectator, was following my every step. The first disturbing experience happened during a stormy October night. I woke up startled, feeling the mattress beside me sink slightly, as if someone had sat down on the edge. I squeezed my eyes shut, convinced it was just my imagination or remnants of a dream. I tried to persuade myself it was merely longing, but it happened again the following night, and the night after that. Each time, the sensation of weight on the bed became more real. I began to fear looking at the empty space and confirming with my own eyes that there was no one there. Over time, other manifestations began to appear. One evening, while I was organizing some old books in Robert's study, something I had been putting off for months, I caught a whiff of a particular cologne that brought immediate memories flooding back. It was the same fragrance Robert used to wear when we attended the town's annual harvest festival. I looked around, searching for some logical explanation, perhaps a forgotten bottle or a scented garment in the closet. I found nothing, yet the smell persisted as if someone was passing very close to me. Another time, I swear I heard my name being whispered clearly in the kitchen at 3 a.m. when I went down for a glass of water. It was a hoarse, low voice, similar to Robert's when he'd just woken up. The cabinets were casting long shadows across the tile floor, and I could have sworn I saw one of those shadows move independently of the others. I started becoming restless and agitated. What once brought me relief now tormented me. My days transformed into a nervous waiting for nightfall, when everything became quieter, and I could swear that even the windows and doors had wills of their own. The wooden floorboards would creak in succession, as if someone was walking down the hallway, always stopping just outside my bedroom door. I spoke with my sister-in-law Grace, who recommended I seek help from a local elder named Ms. Abigail. According to Grace, Ms. Abigail had assisted many people in the region with similar cases, though I'd never heard of anything as concrete as what I was experiencing. When Ms. Abigail came to my house in early December, I felt a tightness in my chest. She entered, looked at the altar, and remained silent for several seconds, rubbing her arms as if feeling a chill that wasn't visible to anyone else. Then she took my hands in hers and said firmly, "Child, you're keeping his spirit here. This isn't healthy, not for you and not for him." I nodded, not quite knowing how to respond. That's when she explained the importance of releasing the ashes and allowing Robert to find rest. I was reluctant at first, because the idea of being without that altar pained me deeply. It was my refuge, my way of coping with the longing. But the fear of continuing to be haunted by a presence that was becoming increasingly unknowable was greater. That same night, Ms. Abigail offered to perform a lengthy and profound prayer, accompanied by some incantations and soft chants that I didn't recognize. It wasn't anything exaggerated or theatrical. It was a simple ritual performed in my living room with the windows closed and only a few candles lit. During the process, she fell silent for several minutes, and I had the strange sensation that someone was observing me closely. Then she opened her eyes and looked directly at me. "He wants you to let him go," she said. "You need to take him to a place of flowing water." I felt a shiver run down my spine because Robert had always loved fishing at Stillwater Creek. I knew with certainty that's where I should leave his ashes. The next morning, I gathered all my fear and courage and placed the wooden box in a cloth bag. I drove to the creek's edge with a knot in my throat and my heart pounding. The day was unnaturally cold for spring, with a light mist covering the dirt road leading to the water. When I arrived, I parked the car and walked to the water's edge. I stood there for several minutes, remembering Robert's smile, the jokes he used to tell, the way he would adjust his cap to protect himself from the sun. Then I took a deep breath and opened the box, letting the ashes mix with the creek waters. As I watched, I had the distinct impression that the moment those particles dissolved in the current, the air around me became lighter. It was as if something had finally found its way. To my surprise, a single white heron appeared from the mist, circled overhead 3 times, and then flew downstream, following the path of the ashes. I had never seen a heron at Stillwater Creek before. Since then, I've never again experienced those sensations in my house. I miss Robert every day, but I've learned that keeping him bound to me in such a physical way prevented him from resting in peace and prevented me from moving forward. I hope my testimony serves as a warning to those who are going through, or may go through, something similar. The love we have for someone isn't contained in a wooden box or a handful of ashes, but in our memories and in everything we learned while living alongside that person. Sometimes when I sit on my porch at sunset, I catch the faint scent of lavender on the breeze, and I smile. Robert is at peace now, and slowly I'm finding mine too. Thank you for listening to my story. If you enjoyed it, please don't forget to leave a like. It means so much. Now let's continue with our next tale. I was born in a small farmhouse near Pinewood Creek, deep in the Appalachian countryside. Since childhood, I lived alongside my parents, my aunts and uncles, and numerous cousins in a sprawling Victorian house with antique wooden window frames, and a yard filled with ancient oak trees and wild blueberry bushes. We were all incredibly close, especially thanks to my Aunt Alina, a woman who radiated tranquility and warmth to everyone who knew her. She was our family's cornerstone, a second mother who was always nearby with a kind word or a welcoming smile. When I was little, Aunt Alina had a habit of singing a lullaby to all the cousins who insisted on staying awake past bedtime. She never cradled anyone in her arms, saying our legs needed to rest properly in bed for us to have sweet dreams. But her soft, gentle voice had the power to calm even the most energetic children. The melody she sang, though simple, sounded like the most beautiful music in the world to us. As years passed, each of us went our separate ways. I moved to Boston for college, and only returned during holidays or extended breaks. Aunt Alina, however, remained at the farmhouse, maintaining the same peaceful rhythm of life she always had. In the fall of 2011, she passed away from natural causes at the age of 84. We decided to cremate her body at my father's suggestion, and in an emotional moment, the family agreed to keep her ashes in a handcrafted ceramic urn displayed in the main living room of the house. We thought this would be a way to keep her present among us. The night we brought her ashes home, I sensed something different in the house, something beyond just the sadness of her absence. During the early hours of morning, I heard soft knocking on the front door. I thought it might be the wind, but my cousin Marcus, who slept in the room next to mine, got up startled and went to check the windows. The The following morning in the kitchen, he remarked, I could have sworn I heard someone tapping on the door with their palm, but I didn't see anyone or anything. My mother, not wanting to alarm us, changed the subject. It must have been one of the tree branches swaying near the roof. Throughout the week, however, the knocking continued, always at the same time, between 2 and 3 in the morning. The sounds were measured, almost rhythmic, as if someone were calling from outside, but unhurriedly. One evening, while I was helping my Aunt Ruth with dinner, we noticed that the flowers in the vase next to Aunt Alina's urn had begun to wither strangely, even though they were watered daily. Nobody could explain it, but something there wasn't in harmony. On the third night, we awoke again to the tapping on the door. Marcus got up and I followed. We went to the living room, passed by the ceramic urn containing the ashes, and stopped in front of the door. We were ready to open it, but our hearts were racing. Then we heard a sound coming from down the hallway, as if a radio had been turned on in one of the empty rooms. We could make out an old melody that seemed to blend with the silence of the early morning. I suddenly remembered the afternoons when Aunt Alina would sit on the porch, listening to her favorite station on the AM dial while knitting. "Are you hearing this?" Marcus asked me with a trembling voice. I nodded, and we rushed to the sitting room where we kept an antique radio. It was unplugged, yet we could still hear the faint sound of music, as if it were echoing through the walls. Suddenly, everything went silent. Only then did we notice that the ceramic urn with the ashes seemed colder than usual when we passed our hands over it, as if emanating a chilly breeze. In the days that followed, everyone reported some strange experience. My mother heard the lullaby, the same one Aunt Alina used to sing to calm the children. My father swore he saw the silhouette of a woman sitting in the rocking chair on the porch, where Aunt Alina used to rest on Sunday afternoons. And I, during one of those sleepless nights, caught the familiar scent of chamomile tea, a drink she prepared to ease tension before bedtime. Perhaps we're disturbing her soul by keeping the ashes in the house, my father suggested. Your aunt loved being free, loved the outdoors, loved feeling the wind through the trees. It was then that we decided to take her to a special place, a small creek behind the farmhouse where Aunt Alina spent hours reading and gathering wildflowers. At the end of that week, we gathered the family, said a prayer, and walked there to scatter her ashes in the waters with all the care and respect she deserved. The sunset painted the sky orange and purple, and when the urn was finally empty, I felt as if a knot that had been binding all our hearts had come undone. That night, for the first time in weeks, no one heard knocking on the door, no footsteps, no radios playing by themselves. The house seemed at peace. The empty ceramic urn, now adorned with fresh mountain laurel, her favorite flower, became a reminder of Aunt Alina's gentle presence in our lives. Sometimes I still think I hear, very faintly, a passage from the lullaby she used to sing, but nowadays I feel no fear or unease, only a peaceful longing, as if she had found her place and we had found ours. But there are moments, particularly during stormy nights when the wind howls through the valley, that I sense something more. 3 weeks after we scattered her ashes, I discovered an old journal of Aunt Alina's tucked beneath a loose floorboard in what used to be her room. The entry stopped abruptly in 1962 with a troubling final passage. What I've seen by the creek must never be spoken of. Some doors once opened cannot be closed, I never told anyone about the journal, and I never mentioned that sometimes, when I visit the farmhouse and walk past the creek at dusk, I see not just one figure standing among the trees on the opposite bank, but two, Aunt Aliner's unmistakable silhouette, and beside her, something taller, less defined, that seems to whisper words I cannot quite make out. The family believes Aunt Aliner has found peace. Perhaps she has, but I wonder if, in freeing her, we might have freed something else as well, something that had been waiting patiently behind that door we heard knocking in the dead of night. My name is Matthew, and it all began in the winter of 2011, when I was 25 years old and living in a small town in northern Maine with my family. My grandfather, Old Jack, a rugged man of 87 who had spent his life fishing the frigid waters and tending to a small maple syrup farm, passed away suddenly one February evening. It was during one of the worst blizzards we'd had in decades, and the doctor said his heart just couldn't hold on anymore. My grandmother, Aliner, was devastated, but she remained steadfast in her decision to have his body cremated, following a wish he had expressed during a family conversation many years before. Somehow he didn't want to freeze solid under 6 feet of snow, as he used to say. After the cremation, his ashes were placed in a simple wooden urn inlaid with polished river stones, and it was kept on the mantelpiece in the living room, right next to a framed photograph where he appeared smiling, with his old fishing hat tilted to one side, and his prized handcrafted fishing rod leaning against the wall behind him. "Son," my grandmother warned one afternoon while dusting the house, "I don't think it's right to keep Jack's ashes here. He always said he didn't want to be tied down to anything or anyone." I didn't argue. I confess that it caused me a certain discomfort seeing that urn every time I walked through the living room. But my parents insisted that for now, it was better to leave it there. "We'll figure something out later," they would say. The family believed there was no problem with this arrangement. We thought my grandmother was just exaggerating because of her grief. The days passed, and we reached November 1st, All Saints' Day. In our town, there's a custom of preparing the house to receive relatives from out of town, and also to visit the cemetery to pray for the dead. Since Grandpa Jack had been cremated, my mother prepared a small tribute in the same place where his urn stood. She placed white pine branches, his favorite tree, a more recent photo, and a plate of maple cookies that he loved to eat with his afternoon tea. The atmosphere in the house was heavy, but nothing unusual was happening until that night. We were all sleeping when I heard a soft noise, like something metal scratching against the wooden floor of the hallway. I woke up disoriented and remained silent, trying to listen more carefully. For a moment, I imagined it might just be a raccoon that had somehow gotten in, or perhaps the strong winter wind rattling the back door. But when I put my foot out of bed, I felt a chill run up my spine. The house was dark, with only the faint light from the moon through the snow-covered window in the hall. I decided to leave my room and walk to the kitchen, thinking I might have left something on. That's when I noticed a slight smell of burning maple wood mixed with something that reminded me of the pipe, tobacco, my grandfather used to smoke decades ago before quitting the habit. I stopped in the middle of the hallway, my heart racing. "Mom," I called out, but received no answer. I continued walking, and as I approached the living room, I saw my grandfather's rocking chair slightly moved, facing a different direction. Before going to bed, I had left it pushed against the wall. The maple and tobacco scent disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, and at that moment, I admit I wasn't sure if the cold was making me imagine things. The next morning, I mentioned the smell and the moved chair to my grandmother, but she didn't seem surprised. My boy, ever since those ashes arrived, I feel like Jack's wandering around here. I've heard footsteps at night. Lord forgive me, but I don't think it's right to keep that urn here. I was still reluctant to believe it. I thought it was just her grief speaking loudly. But as the days went by, the signs became clearer. One night, I woke up to the sound of a throat clearing, very characteristic of my grandfather when he was alive. I even went to my parents' room, but they were sound asleep. I returned to the hallway and stood there in the dark, trying to hear something. Nothing, just silence heavy as lead. I decided to mention it to my mother. She said she'd also been smelling something strange in the late afternoon. Every time, she passed near the mantelpiece where the ashes were kept. It smells like maple sap boiling in the sugar house, but it comes suddenly and disappears without explanation, she whispered while putting away the dishes. From then on, the occurrences became more intense. On a Friday night, some relatives came to stay at our house to keep my grandmother company. We were all in the living room, chatting, when around 2:30 in the morning, we heard the sound of footsteps on the back porch. My cousin Richard, who is 5 years older than me, decided to go there with a flashlight. Some followed him, others stayed in the kitchen quiet. "Is anybody there?" he called out, pointing the light toward the woodshed. No response, but the wind was rattling the door of the shed, and we could hear the firewood shifting as if someone had just rummaged through it. No thief, no animal, just an uncomfortable feeling that there was someone else with us. When we returned inside the house, we found the living room door slightly ajar. The urn with the ashes was slightly out of place, tilted forward as if someone had tried to pick it up. That was frightening. My grandmother clasped her hands and began to pray quietly. My aunt, who had always doubted these stories, finally showed concern. We all fell silent, not knowing what to say. Then at that moment, we heard again that dry cough coming from somewhere near the hallway. My heart practically stopped, a warning that we weren't alone. The next day, my mother suggested we arrange a memorial service for my grandfather at the local church. My grandmother was relieved just hearing the idea. We spoke with the pastor, explained that old Jack still hadn't had a proper final rest because his ashes remained in the living room at home. We scheduled the service for the following Sunday. During the ceremony, everyone prayed and asked for peace for my grandfather's soul. There was a sense of comfort that we hadn't felt in a long time. Later, after the service, my grandmother announced that she wanted to scatter the ashes at Whispering Pines Lake, where my grandfather had spent countless hours fishing throughout his life. She was convinced that he needed to rest definitively, away from the domestic environment. My mother and my uncles agreed without questioning. We took the car and drove there in the late afternoon, carrying the urn wrapped in a white handkerchief that my grandmother had kept since she was a young woman. The lake was partially frozen, but there was a small section near the shore where the water still flowed. It was there, near his favorite fishing spot, that we scattered his ashes, placed a small wooden marker with his name carved into it, and said a collective prayer. We stayed for a few minutes in silence as the breeze of the day's end blew gently across the water. For the first time in weeks, I felt that the tension had dissipated. Since then, we've never heard any coughing around the house, nor smelled that pipe tobacco scent. It was as if, finally, my grandfather had found his resting place, without needing to wander through the rooms of the home he had loved so much in life. But there was one final surprise waiting for us. The following spring, when the ice melted completely and the fishing season began again, my cousin and I took Grandpa's old boat out onto Whispering Pines Lake. As we passed the spot where we had scattered his ashes, the still water suddenly rippled in a perfect circle, despite there being no wind. And there, in that exact spot, my cousin caught the biggest rainbow trout anyone in town had seen in 50 years. The old-timers at the general store said it must have been old Jack's way of letting us know he was finally at peace, exactly where he belonged all along. Good evening. My name is Maria, and just over a year ago, I lived through the most terrifying nightmare of my life. I lost my daughter during childbirth. There wasn't time for her to open her eyes, or even for me to feel the warmth of her body in my arms. The hospital fell silent that snowy night of January 3rd, a silence that still echoes in my head. The thought of burying her body terrified me. I couldn't bear the notion of leaving her somewhere cold and dark, when all I held in my arms was just a memory. So I made the decision to have her cremated and keep the ashes at home, in our old wooden house on the outskirts of the Carpathians, which my husband and I had renovated the previous autumn. At first, I thought it would be a way to keep her close, but I couldn't foresee what would happen next. I placed the urn on a small shelf in the room I had prepared for her arrival. Bowden, my husband, tried to dissuade me several times. "Maria, are you sure? Don't you think a traditional burial would be better?" he asked, looking at me with worried eyes. I just lowered my head, unable to respond clearly. Perhaps it was stubbornness or desperation, but I clung to the belief that keeping her ashes here would help me endure the pain. A few days after the symbolic funeral, the sounds began. Initially, they were faint noises, similar to a soft moan. They seemed to grow from the walls in the deep of night, almost like an echo of my own sorrow. I tried to convince myself that it was the product of my grief, a manifestation of my wounded mind. But with each night, the volume increased. Now it was no longer just one cry, but several, as if there were multiple infants scattered throughout the house. Despite this, I tried to remain rational. With a background in psychology, I always believed that trauma could cause hallucinations or nightmares, and I continued to repeat to myself, "It's your mind playing tricks on you. It can't be real." However, Bowden's behavior began to change. He started waking up in the middle of the night, restless, and although he wouldn't openly admit it, I noticed that he heard something too. One time, he woke me up around 4 in the morning. "Do you hear that?" "My God, it sounds like a child crying in the hallway," he whispered, trembling. I sat up in bed, trying to stay calm. I confirmed that I had heard it too, but didn't want to frighten him more than we already were. As the weeks passed, the crying transformed into more intense moans. I began to see doors and windows trembling, as if a strong wind was sweeping through the rooms, even when the windows were closed. The sound reverberated, enveloping the entire house. Bowden's mother, Mrs. Oksana, came to visit us one Sunday after hearing rumors that something was wrong with me. During lunch, she frowned several times, as if catching some noise from the adjacent room. "Did you leave the television on?" she asked, turning toward the dark corridor. Bowden and I denied it. We fell silent, fearing she would get up to check the room and discover what I had done. On one particularly frosty February night, I woke up with a strange sensation in my arms. It was as if I was holding a light weight that was simultaneously absolutely real. My eyes opened quickly, but the darkness of the room allowed me to see almost nothing. My hands trembled because I felt that something was there, nestled against me. "What is this?" I mumbled, not expecting an answer. I dared to lift the blanket slightly, and came face to face with a contorted shadow, small, almost translucent. It was impossible to clearly distinguish a face, but the silhouette resembled a moving infant. It was a quick and horrifying glimpse, because at that same moment I heard crying spreading throughout the house. The entity disappeared from my arms, just as Bowden turned on the nightlight. "Maria, what did you see?" he asked, already frightened. "I don't know. My heart was beating so hard it hurt." I looked at the shelf where the urn stood. Cold sweat broke over me as I tried to connect the details. At that moment, both Bowden and I heard a distinct cry of agony coming precisely from the direction of the nursery. We ran out to the living room, not knowing how to react. After much hesitation, we decided to seek spiritual help. Bowden's mother recommended an old acquaintance, Mrs. Sophia, known for her prayers for the sick and advice for families in mourning. On the evening of February 17th, she entered our house, stopped before the urn, and placed her hand on her heart, saying nothing. She shed a few tears, as if understanding the pain we were experiencing. When we gathered in the living room, she requested, "You need to hold a symbolic funeral with prayers and proper farewells. What happened was tragic, but your daughter has not found peace." I confess, I cried a lot hearing that, because my entire being resisted the thought of losing the ashes again. But gradually, I understood that it wasn't just about me. Perhaps I had bound that soul, without even realizing it. After thinking for several days, I agreed to organize an intimate funeral. We invited only a few people, just those who truly mattered in our story. It was in March, in a small church on the mountain. We prayed, listened to words of comfort, and finally buried the ashes in a dignified place with a small plaque bearing the name we had chosen for her before birth, Sophia. Since then, the crying has stopped. The house fell silent in an almost strange way, as if wanting to say that everything was finally in order. Sometimes I still wake up anxiously, remembering what I experienced. In such moments, I look at the corner of the room where the shelf once stood and feel a slight trembling. Perhaps I will never stop imagining that my daughter is somehow trying to communicate with me. But I've chosen to believe that now she rests in peace. Although, last night when I lit a candle by her photograph, it seemed to me that the flame flickered in a completely windless room, and from the distant corner where the urn once stood came something like the quiet laughter of a child. never thought I'd share this story with anyone. Even now, my chest tightens just thinking about it. My name is Michael, and everything began about 8 months ago when my cousin Jake showed up at our house, carrying an ornate wooden box containing the ashes of our Uncle Victor. Uncle Victor was always a mysterious figure in our family. He died in a motorcycle accident on a deserted stretch of highway in northern Maine. The investigation never fully explained what happened. There were unusual burn marks on his body, but the official cause of death was listed as the collision. Despite these unsettling circumstances, Jake was adamant about honoring Uncle Victor's memory by keeping his remains close to us. "It's the least we can do," Jake would argue whenever my mother, Sarah, protested. "This isn't right, honey," she'd counter, her eyes full of concern. "The ashes should be in a cemetery or at the church, not here in our home." But to Jake, Uncle Victor was practically a hero. He insisted the urn should be displayed prominently in the living room, right beside our family photos. So on a cold Tuesday morning in late October, there it was, that dark walnut urn with his name engraved in gleaming gold letters. For the first 3 weeks, nothing unusual happened, but I sensed a strange energy lingering in the air, something difficult to articulate. My mother noticed the heavy atmosphere too, but Jake remained stubborn. He would carefully dust the urn with a soft cloth, proudly talking about how well we were taking care of Uncle Victor. I kept quiet, but my sleep began to deteriorate. I started having nightmares where I saw his face covered in soot, as if suffering from invisible burns. His eyes would stare at me with a mix of rage and desperation that left me gasping for air when I woke up. Then, during one particularly frigid night in December, I woke up thirsty around 3 in the morning. I padded down to the kitchen without turning on any lights to avoid waking anyone. As I passed by the living room doorway, I was struck by a powerful smell of smoke. It wasn't cigarettes or incense. It smelled like burning wood, but with a sour, suffocating undertone that made my lungs ache. I checked all the outlets, the fireplace, the stove, everything was off. The smell vanished suddenly, just as quickly as it had appeared. I returned to my bedroom, with my heart hammering against my ribs. The following morning, my mother mentioned it while making coffee. Did someone burn something last night? There was a strong smell of fire in the living room. I smelled it too, I admitted, but I couldn't find the source. Jake shrugged dismissively. Probably just the neighbors having a late-night bonfire. Or maybe it's that old wiring in the basement. I'll check it later, but things didn't stop there. At night, I began hearing sounds coming from the walls in the hallway. At first, it was just a light tapping, like fingernails drumming gently. Then the sounds grew more insistent, like someone pounding their fists in desperation. When I went to investigate and flipped on the light, I saw the urn exactly where it always was, but I could swear it was facing a different direction than before, as if someone had rotated it slightly. Once, my mother and I were in the kitchen preparing dinner when we heard footsteps coming from the living room. Initially, I thought Jake had returned early from his evening class at the community college, but he wasn't due back until after 9. My mother gave me a frightened look and whispered, "Are you sure he's not home?" "Positive, Mom. He texted me 20 minutes ago saying he was still at the library." When we cautiously entered the living room, we found absolute silence, No footsteps, no smell, nothing out of place. Except I noticed that a framed family photo next to the urn had been turned face down. The worst night came when Jake started behaving strangely. He locked himself in his room and stopped eating properly. Deep dark circles under his bloodshot eyes made it clear he wasn't sleeping. When I knocked on his door to check on him, he opened it just a crack, his face pale and gaunt. "You okay?" I asked, concerned by his appearance. He responded with a trembling voice. "I think I saw Uncle Victor in the bathroom mirror last night, Mike. He looked burned. His skin was blistered and black, and he was watching me with this expression of agony. And the worst part, he was trying to tell me something, but I couldn't understand him." Right at that moment, the smell of smoke flooded the hallway with overwhelming intensity, as if rising straight through the floorboards. Jake went completely white and began hyperventilating. My mother rushed to help him, and through her tears she shouted, "We can't keep that urn here anymore." Despite Jake's protests, the next morning she took matters into her own hands. She carefully wrapped the urn in a velvet cloth and drove to St. Matthew's, the old stone church downtown. There she spoke with Father Thomas, explaining the situation as best she could. He listened silently, nodding his head as if he dealt with similar cases before. "There are souls who don't fully understand their departure," he said in a calm but firm tone. "If your brother's spirit seems restless, perhaps it's because he feels the circumstances of his death remain unresolved. I'll arrange a special mass for his soul." The ashes remained at the church in a place the priest deemed appropriate, saying it would be more dignified than having them displayed at home without proper prayers. My mother, still wiping away tears, agreed. I felt immediate relief after weeks of disturbed sleep. The oppressive atmosphere gradually gave way to a sense of calm, as if the air itself had been purified. Jake, however, continued visiting the church every Thursday, bringing fresh flowers and praying quietly by the small alcove where Uncle Victor's ashes were kept. He doesn't talk much about Uncle Victor anymore, but I can tell he carries a profound guilt, perhaps believing our uncle needed more answers than we could provide. Sometimes I still catch a faint whiff of smoke drifting through our house, but it dissipates so quickly that I wonder if it's just a persistent memory of those strange days when we lived with the remains of a man who couldn't accept his end. The strangest part came just last week, though. I was cleaning out some old boxes in the attic when I found a small leather journal I'd never seen before. Inside, in what I recognized as Uncle Victor's handwriting, were detailed notes about an investigation he'd been conducting before his death. Something about a local business he suspected of arson for insurance fraud. The final entry, dated just 2 days before his accident, read, "Meeting with S. Tonight. Have evidence. We'll finish this once and for all. I haven't shown the journal to Jake or my mother yet. Some truths might be better left buried, especially when the dead seem unwilling to rest without them." I was born and raised in Pine Hollow, a tiny rural community where everyone knew each other and gossip spread faster than wildfire in July. The house I lived in was a simple wooden structure with faded blue paint peeling off the siding, and a backyard full of chickens that managed to find their way into the most improbable corners. I was about 11 years old when everything happened. Back then, my parents and my grandfather still lived with me. My father, Tom, worked part-time at the local lumber mill, but most of our family's income came from the small vegetable farm where my mother, Sarah, spent long hours tending to her rows of produce. I remember clearly when it all began, because it coincided with the arrival of several new kids at our one-room schoolhouse. Among these newcomers was a boy who caught my attention, Wesley, a somewhat shy kid who always seemed to carry an air of curiosity about him. I discovered that he was the grandson of an elderly woman who lived further out, at the end of a property overgrown with wild blackberry bushes and enclosed by rusty, barbed wire fences. Wesley's grandmother was officially named Mrs. Blackwood, but there were those who called her the witch or the dark healer, though nobody dared say this openly to her face. Soon after we became friends, Wesley told me things that left me intrigued. He said that occasionally, strange people would visit his grandmother's house, both during daylight and after dark, seeking remedies or spiritual cleansings. I wasn't entirely sure what that meant, but curiosity consumed me. When I asked my grandfather, Old Man Joseph, about it, he sighed deeply and told me, "Son, that woman isn't someone you want to get mixed up with. Best leave that family alone." My mother and father typically agreed on one thing. They preferred I didn't spend too much time at Wesley's house. But at that age, I couldn't see any malice in the elderly figure of Mrs. Blackwood. To me, she was just a hunched woman in her late 70s or 80s, with sun-weathered skin and deep-set eyes. Simply my friend's grandmother, nothing more. Time passed, and Wesley, who was 13 while I was 11, began sharing even stranger stories. One day, he showed me from a distance a book he had found sitting on a small table in his grandmother's living room. He said the pages were yellowed, filled with images of distorted creatures, some resembling men with animal heads, others depicting human forms kneeling before bizarre statues. He claimed he never fully understood what was written because it was in a strange language. I kept imagining what it would be like to flip through that book. During recess at school, Wesley and I hid behind the maintenance shed, and he pulled the mysterious book from his backpack. The pages were truly horrifying. The drawings appeared to be hand-carved, showing rituals and people surrounded by lit candles. One of the figures had the head of a black goat and was encircled by kneeling women holding oil lamps. I felt a shiver run down my spine and forcefully closed the book. "This is really creepy," I muttered, handing it back. Wesley nodded and confessed that he found it all uncomfortable, but he was just as curious as I was. For a while, I began observing Mrs. Blackwood from a distance. Whenever I passed by the dirt road near her property, I had the sensation that she knew what I had seen. She walked with a twisted wooden cane, and the wind would make the black scarf tied around her head flutter ominously. She didn't always look in my direction, but when she did, it felt like she could see right through me. One day, Wesley invited me to his house after school. My father had made it clear he didn't approve of this idea, but stubborn as any child, I went anyway. The house was simple, with dark walls and antique furniture. Mrs. Blackwood wasn't in the living room at that moment, so Wesley and I sat on the floor to watch a program on an old television set that barely got reception and constantly fizzled with static. Eventually, we grew bored and decided to play hide and seek. "Count to 20, I told Wesley as I ran down the hallway. I chose a closed bedroom door and entered quietly. It was dark inside, with the scent of dried herbs hanging in the air. That's when I noticed something next to an old dresser, covered with a deep purple, almost black cloth. It looked like an improvised altar or some kind of high bench. I approached and carefully pulled back the fabric to find small statues made of some pale material. Each figure represented a man or woman with animal heads, dog heads, pig heads, goat heads. The paint on their eyes was reddish, almost alive looking. My skin crawled. It seemed like they were staring at me angrily, as if guarding something forbidden. I tried to cover everything back up, but the door opened behind me, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. I saw Mrs. Blackwood enter with a surprisingly agile step for someone her age. She wore a worn-out dark dress and carried an old satchel bursting with dried plants and pieces of cloth. "Well, boy, what are you doing here?" She spoke in a low, almost gentle voice. "Looking for something you shouldn't," I stammered, lost for words. I tried to say I was just playing, but only disconnected whispers came out. She smiled somewhat mockingly and gestured for me to leave. "Why don't you stay for a snack with Wesley?" she added, still smiling. No, thank you. I need to get home, or my father will be angry with me." I barely managed to articulate the sentence. I felt my heart pounding in my throat as I ran out the door, tripping over an aluminum basin in the process. The old woman let out a hoarse laugh that echoed down the corridor, making me even more frightened. Wesley never appeared. I think during that time, he was hiding somewhere at the other end of the house. I returned home with shaky legs. When my mother saw how disturbed I was, she simply asked, "You went to Wesley's house, didn't you? We've told you not to go there." I lowered my eyes and nodded without much conviction. I knew they noticed my terror, but I preferred to remain silent. From that day on, my father reinforced the prohibition. "I don't want you hanging around that boy anymore, and if you see his grandmother, pretend you don't know her." I agreed. In the days that followed, Wesley still tried to approach me at school, but I pretended not to see him. I preferred to join other classmates, afraid of what else I might discover if I stayed close to him. One weekend, I was playing at the house of one of these new friends, Ethan, when Mrs. Blackwood appeared at the door, leaning on her cane, asking if they sold eggs. It was common for neighbors to raise chickens and sell eggs in the area. As soon as the old woman entered, I froze. She settled into a wooden chair, stared at me, and cleared her throat. "I just want some eggs, my dear," she said, addressing Ethan's mother. The woman readily went to get the eggs, but didn't seem very pleased with the visit. I then stood up to leave the room. It was at that moment that I felt a sharp pain in my left leg. It felt like an insect bite, but it burned like a stinger. I contained myself to avoid screaming. Mrs. Blackwood received the eggs, paid with crumpled coins, and got up with difficulty, making a bizarre purring sound in her chest, as if she had a cat trapped where her lungs should be. Before leaving, she turned in my direction, chuckled softly, and spat phlegm onto the living room floor. Only after she left did I sit back down, but the pain in my leg persisted. Later at home, I went to take a shower, and when I lowered my pants, I saw an enormous needle stuck in my muscle. leaving a wound that was slowly bleeding. I carefully removed it and called my mother. "My God, where did you get this?" she exclaimed in shock. I explained what had happened, and she shook her head, saying, "This is why we keep telling you to stay away from that house. Now you'll have to deal with it." My grandfather, upon hearing the story, simply said that the old woman wanted to scare me, and that I should pray and avoid further trouble. Indeed, after a few days, the puncture healed, and everything returned to normal. Shortly afterward, Wesley and his family moved to another town. Mrs. Blackwood's house became even more mysterious, as now only she lived on that shadowy property. Rumors began to circulate that on full moon nights, some shadows moved around the yard as if they were large animals. One afternoon, my father was on the porch cleaning an old shotgun. He used this weapon to hunt wild doves occasionally, when suddenly we heard a neighbor's shouts. "Fire! There's a fire at the house down the road." Everyone ran to help, carrying buckets, pots, and basins filled with water. I nearly collapsed when I realized that the house in flames was Mrs. Blackwood's. The roof was smoking, the wooden pillars were cracking, and orange flames were devouring everything. The old woman, however, suddenly appeared, emerging from the darkness between the blackberry bushes. She was muttering something, swaying her body as if chanting a prayer or a curse, I'm not sure which. Then, in a flash that appeared when part of the house collapsed, I swear I saw a large black dog running toward the backyard where Mrs. Blackwood kept some chicken coops. Not even 2 minutes passed before the old woman herself emerged from there, without anyone having seen the dog leave. I stood frozen, wondering if my eyes were deceiving me. Nobody else seemed to notice this detail, as they were busy trying to extinguish the flames or help the elderly woman. In the end, the local township built another simple shack for her. As they said, she had no family there now that her grandson had gone far away. I tried to put all this behind me and move on with life. A few months later, the corn harvest arrived, and my father sent me to fetch some ears from the field. Off I went with a wicker basket under my arm. It was almost dark when, in the middle of the cornfield, I saw a black figure passing between the rows of plants. My heart raced as I recognized the same dog from the fire. Its head was large, with eyes that almost glowed in the twilight. I was paralyzed for a few moments, and when I finally turned my body to flee, I found Mrs. Blackwood crouched a few meters away from me, gathering what looked like herbs for tea. She raised her face, and her eyes met mine. I abandoned the basket of corn on the ground and ran back home as fast as I could, feeling the branches of corn leaves scratching my arms and sweat running down my forehead. When I arrived, I was shocked to see that the old woman was already there, sitting in a plastic chair, talking to my mother. "Where's the corn?" my mother asked me as soon as she saw me. "You're back already." "Lazy boy, Mrs. Blackwood let out a little laugh and said nothing. My mother refused to buy the plants that the elderly woman was trying to sell, with evident disgust for her thin, wounded hands. I just wanted to get out of there. Time passed. A week later, my father began to feel unbearable stomach pain. Initially, we thought it was something trivial, but the pain increased each day, accompanied by vomiting and blood. He grew pale, weak, and refused to eat. No pharmacy medicine had any effect. It was then that my grandfather, desperate, called Mrs. Martinez, a healer from the region known for helping those whom ordinary faith healers couldn't cure. My father, who had always doubted these things, was already so weak that he agreed to receive help. When she arrived, Mrs. Martinez said low prayers using branches of rue and guinea hemp, asking for protection from the Virgin Mary. She passed a farm-raised egg over my father's body, repeating words I couldn't understand. He began to tremble, sweat cold, and even cried out in pain. After some time, she broke the egg into a glass of water. The white and yolk formed a strange pattern, like a small, twisted face full of bubbles. The healer tilted her head and declared, "Someone has placed a powerful curse against him. They wanted to take his life." My grandfather began to sob. "It was that old woman. She has something against Tom." Mrs. Martinez nodded and explained that about a year earlier, another young man from the region had suffered similar symptoms and did not survive. Only afterward did she discover how to neutralize that type of spell with prayers and herbal baths, along with specific rituals. She could interrupt the evil. My father took almost 3 months to recover completely, but thanks to Mrs. Martinez, he didn't die. The hatred he felt for Mrs. Blackwood grew, but he preferred not to confront her. He thought that if he went to challenge her, something worse might happen. Today, as an adult, I see it all as a heavy episode from my past. Mrs. Blackwood's house remains there, with its rusted fences and windows covered with dark cloth. They say that from time to time, outsiders appear to visit her. Wesley returned to the region, but lives on the other side of the township, without returning to live with his grandmother. We have contact on social media, but the subject remains untouched. It seems that everyone, including myself, prefers to pretend that the story was left behind. However, I never forget the gazes of that old woman, the dog suddenly disappearing, the statues with animal heads, and the sleepless nights when I heard my father moan in pain. To this day, I avoid passing near her property, afraid of a horse laugh echoing among the blackberry bushes. Hey folks, thanks for listening. Click the notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I post new videos every day here, and I hope to see you in the next ones. On the screen now, I'm leaving 2 other good videos that I know you'll like. See you there. Good evening, everyone. My name is Amber, and I grew up in Willow Creek, a sleepy coastal town in Maine where everyone knows each other and news travels faster than the morning fog. Up on Lighthouse Hill, where the salty wind whips through the pine trees, and the air carries the scent of freshly baked blueberry pie from Mrs. Porter's Bakery, sits my childhood home. I've made sure to preserve every detail of what I experienced there, because I believe that the stories that mark us most deeply are those that could happen to anyone, anywhere. And it's this story, so real and so haunting, that I'm about to share. Since I was a little girl, my mother, Charlotte, warned me about false friends. She would tirelessly repeat, "Honey, listen carefully. Keep few friends, but make sure they're genuine. Not everyone wishes you well." Back then, I thought these warnings were overblown. Every child wants the freedom to choose who to play with and who to trust. But as the years passed, I watched my mother deal with people who tried to take advantage of her at every turn. I also heard tales of betrayals and malicious gossip from those we least expected. Still, I thought it would be different for me. I hadn't done anything wrong, so why should I doubt people's intentions? I grew up in that small, weathered New England house with its blue shutters, perched atop a hill of uneven cobblestones. Every day, I watched my mother working hard to pay the bills, take care of me, and still help manage the family's small lobster boat business. My father had passed away when I was still young, and because of this, I learned early on to appreciate every small victory. In my early teens, I started attending Willow Creek High, a simple school but with dedicated teachers. We didn't always have all the resources, but life on the coast taught us the value of making do with what you have. At almost 17, I could handle most household chores, and on weekends, my mother would take me to Ted's General Store, where I helped serve customers and count change. It was during this time that I met Natalie, a girl with a wide smile and soft-spoken words. She wasn't from Willow Creek since birth. She had moved there recently. Perhaps it was this air of novelty that drew me to her, without setting up barriers. Natalie would show up at the store occasionally, chat with me, and always had some kind, funny comment to make. Slowly, we developed that special complicity, typical of teenage girls. We shared our complaints about difficult tests, our dreams of seeing the world, and even some age-appropriate insecurities. During classes, we sat close to each other, exchanging confidences through notes or whispers. I thought to myself, what a cool girl. I hope this friendship lasts. However, as time went on, some of her behaviors sparked a twinge of suspicion, even though I didn't want to admit it. When we had lunch together, Natalie would suggest I pay the bill, claiming she was temporarily out of money. At classmates' birthday parties, she'd always show up empty-handed, but leave with borrowed gifts, or helping herself to food without even saying thank you. I tried to see all this as just her way, not a character flaw. Deep down, though, I remembered my mother's warnings, but I didn't want to distance myself because I thought my trust and lightness would serve to break down any barriers between us. After finishing high school, I went on to take accounting courses at a community college in a nearby town, while Natalie showed little interest in studying. She kept getting involved in schemes or small gigs that brought in quick money. When we stopped seeing each other so frequently, our bond loosened, and I confess that little by little, I began to realize how that relationship seemed to revolve around what I could offer. Over time, Natalie kind of disappeared from my life, and I continued my quiet routine in Willow Creek. I completed my technical courses, and during one of my trips back and forth, I ended up working for a few months at the office of a local marine biologist, trying to save money to help my mother. I took side jobs, handled cost spreadsheets, and on weekends still returned to Ted's store. These jobs kept my mind occupied, and without realizing it, I ended up blocking out almost all memory of Natalie. It was as if life was taking me on a different path, something more stable and quiet. Things changed course when I turned 23. During this period, I met Andrew, a hardworking man with a calm demeanor who caught my attention from our first conversation. He came from a humble family from another state, but had been visiting relatives in Willow Creek since childhood. Our meeting happened on a fall day, during the farmers' market that has been held on Saturday mornings in the town square for decades. I had arrived early to buy fresh vegetables, and he was setting up a woodworking stall that belonged to his uncle. We started talking by chance when I dropped some apples, and he helped me gather them. His shyness contrasted with the curiosity I felt. We exchanged brief words, but the connection was immediate. "Are you from around here too, Amber?" he asked. "Born and raised here. I live up there near the Lighthouse Church," I replied. "Funny, I thought I knew almost everyone around here. I've never seen you before. I mostly stay at home taking care of things and helping my mom. But I come to the market when I need to buy vegetables. If you need help carrying anything, just let me know." Later that afternoon, we met again at the town gazebo where a local folk band was playing. Andrew offered me a piece of cornbread from one of the stalls, and we sat there talking unhurriedly, watching families having fun and stray dogs wandering around the place. He told me about his dream of opening a carpentry workshop, as he always loved working with wood and creating artisanal pieces. Enthusiastically, I talked about my ambitions to grow in the accounting field. It wasn't long before we started seeing each other every day, each conversation bringing more affinity and complicity. It was as if I had finally found someone who saw beyond my gestures of kindness and my limited life experience. In the months that followed, we started dating. Willow Creek is small, so everyone found out quickly, and my mother, proud, grew very fond of Andrew. With his serene personality, he gave me security and always offered to make repairs in our house, fixing the gate, changing the kitchen light bulb that kept burning out. These were seemingly simple gestures, but they meant a lot in a place where you don't easily find specialized services. When we completed about a year together, we decided to get married. The ceremony was quite simple in the Willow Creek Chapel. There weren't fancy decorations, but there was genuine joy in the smiles of the guests, almost all our neighbors and relatives. I felt my heart light, full of hope, and ready to build a united family. During the celebration, I remembered how unpredictable life is. I was starting a new chapter, and I could never have imagined that in that same place, fate would bring back someone from my past to shake everything up. After the wedding, I moved into Andrew's house, which was on a piece of land away from downtown, surrounded by pine trees, and with a large yard where chickens scratched around the kale bed. I set up a home full of small joys there. I stopped working formally to dedicate myself to the role of wife, and after almost 2 years, I became a mother. I had a little boy, Ethan, who completely transformed my priorities. Despite the financial difficulties, as Andrew was still saving money to open his own carpentry workshop, we managed well. I helped with occasional accounting jobs for acquaintances, and with that, we earned some extra income. My life went on peacefully, divided between taking care of little Ethan, cleaning the house, and making lunch for Andrew, who worked in a makeshift woodshop behind a rustic furniture store. But Willow Creek also had its religious festivals, the annual carnival in the square, the processions, and the folk music circles. So from time to time, we'd come out of isolation to have a little fun. My relationship with Andrew was stable, and I thanked every day for having found an attentive husband. But things in real life rarely stay 100% stable for very long. With the arrival of the end of the year, the town began preparations for Christmas. In Willow Creek, we don't have big malls or sophisticated lights, but each resident likes to decorate their window or set up a nativity scene in the living room. Andrew and I were no different. I bought some colored lights, hung chains of crepe paper, and placed the nativity scene near the tree, improvising with some burlap scraps to simulate straw. It was during one of these organizing afternoons that the past knocked on my door. Natalie returned. She appeared with a smile that reminded me of those teenage times, but there was a different gleam in her eye. Or perhaps what was missing was the innocence I thought I had known. She was well dressed in a tight dress and high heels, carrying a purse way too expensive for Willow Creek standards. My mother had stopped by my house that morning to help me take care of Ethan, and ended up witnessing Natalie's arrival. I remember her eyes narrowing in suspicion, but politely she withdrew to the backyard, leaving us two to talk. "Oh my God, Amber, I've missed you so much. How are you? Surprised to see you here. It's been a long time since we spoke." "Well, I've traveled a lot over these last few years, but I decided to take a break from the hustle and come back here. I came to visit some distant relatives and, of course, had to find a way to see you too. I'm glad you're doing well. I'm married now, have a son who's almost 2. "Girl, that's great," she said, looking around curiously. "This house is really nice and cozy. You've done well for yourself." I couldn't help but notice the evaluative air she had in every corner, as if measuring the value of everything. Despite the discomfort, courtesy prevented me from immediately sending Natalie away. I offered coffee and cheese biscuits, which she accepted without ceremony. We talked for about 20 minutes, and she left without much fanfare. But before leaving, she mentioned she would drop by more often. I felt a tightness in my chest as I remembered my mother's advice and certain old memories. That night I talked to Andrew, who didn't seem to mind. On the contrary, he said it would be good for me to have someone to chat with now and then. I, however, wasn't sure if I wanted to strengthen ties. But life went on, and if Natalie were just a curious acquaintance, perhaps everything would be all right. For this very reason, weeks later, Natalie's presence began to become insistent. She would show up in the morning without calling ahead, knock on the gate, bring some candy or cornbread she claimed to have received, and spend a long time chatting. At first, I tried to be welcoming, but soon realized she wanted to know about our financial situation, about the progress of Andrew's plans to set up the carpentry shop. She asked if I really trusted his ideas, if I didn't think everything was moving too slowly. That made me uncomfortable, because it sounded like someone sowing doubt. On the rare occasions when Andrew was home when Natalie arrived, I noticed she made an effort to engage him in conversation. Her way of telling jokes, laughing too loudly, giving exaggerated compliments, it all seemed a bit artificial to me. During a Sunday lunch, she suddenly appeared with the excuse that she missed Ethan. I sat with them in the kitchen, and then she started making comments about craftsmanship, suggesting partnerships, saying she had contacts in other cities, and that Andrew could make much more money if he expanded the business. He, naturally enthusiastic, listened to everything with interest. My mother, who sometimes stayed with us on weekends, pulled me aside and whispered, "This girl doesn't smell right to me, honey. Be careful what she might do. People who come out of nowhere offering easy deals usually have ulterior motives." I agreed, but didn't want to create immediate friction with Natalie. Nor did it seem prudent to argue with Andrew over a friend who had just returned. I tried to carry on normally, hoping it was all just a bad impression on my part. But circumstances began to show me that something really wasn't right. After a few days, I noticed that Andrew was more absent than usual. He said he needed to hunt for material to make extra orders, and thus get money for his much-dreamed-of carpentry studio. At first, I was proud of his dedication, but one late afternoon, I saw the two of them talking at the bus stop in the main square. Natalie looked around, as if checking if anyone was watching, and talked with animated gestures, while Andrew paid attention and smiled back. I tried to stay calm, but something inside me was writhing in agony. I had no proof of anything, just suspicions. That night I asked casually, "Andrew, were you with Natalie today in the square?" "Oh yes, she ran into me by chance and said she has a friend who can invest in a workshop. You know, this contact could change everything for us, Amber." "I hope so, but just be careful not to trust too much in someone who promises a lot." He didn't like my tone. I could tell he was defending Natalie more than I expected. Perhaps he was enchanted by the possible advantages she offered. Even with a heavy heart, I tried to suffocate my uneasiness. However, my anguish only increased. Each day, a new pretext for Natalie to show up at home appeared. When she didn't come, I discovered that Andrew was meeting with her somewhere in Willow Creek. One afternoon, he left his phone charging in the living room, and while I was organizing some documents, a message arrived. I couldn't resist looking at that preview on the screen that revealed a passage ending with, "If you want, I can help you solve this another way." My body froze. That phrase seemed innocent, but the way Natalie talked to Andrew sounded too intimate. I didn't open the conversation for fear of being discovered, but the nagging suspicion became giant. Whenever Natalie appeared, I noticed she avoided being alone with me. Whenever my mother or Andrew showed up, she would jump from one subject to another in a way that left me speechless when I tried to confront her. "Natalie, is everything okay? Do you need something?" She would look away. "Nothing, friend, just stopping by. Must be nice to live so close to nature, right?" I had the impression she was playing dumb, but with a calculated objective. It was as if she enjoyed seeing me confused. And there was another issue. Andrew, little by little, seemed to be changing his behavior. He would get anxious, not looking me straight in the eye, and when I asked about his plans, he would respond vaguely. The proximity between the two was undeniable, and it was eating me up inside. One night when I returned from the market, I saw Andrew and Natalie in the backyard. They were talking softly, seeming tense. I was paralyzed near the door, not knowing whether to advance or not. That's when Natalie touched his arm and whispered something that made him hesitate. I approached, trying not to hide, but also not wanting to seem aggressive. They heard my footsteps and immediately moved apart, pretending they were talking about business. There was no fight at that time because Ethan cried in his crib, and I had to comfort him. But I spent the night wide awake, suffocated by the pain of suspicion. In the days that followed, the situation only worsened. Andrew looked at me with guilt, but also with a certain impatience, as if he were irritated by my apprehension. Natalie, for her part, would appear and disappear from Willow Creek as she pleased, but always left traces. A note apologizing for not having met me. A quick message on my phone. People around started to comment, almost with pity, because in a small town, everything becomes gossip. My mother, always cautious, insisted that I take care of myself, pray, and not fall into discussions that could harm me. Pray, Amber. Have faith. Don't let the enemy in. If this girl came to disturb you, your faith will protect you. I was never very mystical, but at that moment I was looking for any support. It was then that a neighbor directed me to Mrs. Winters, a healer known in Willow Creek for removing hexes and warding off the evil eye. One afternoon, carrying Ethan in my arms, I went to her house, a clay-colored house, simple, with a small herb garden in the corner. I was received with a mild smile. "Come in, my child. Sit down, make yourself comfortable. Thank you, Mrs. Winters. I came here because I'm going through problems. I feel a strange energy in my house, in my life." The healer didn't ask for details, but raised a sprig of rosemary, asked me to close my eyes, and began to bless me, murmuring prayers interspersed. The smell of the fresh herb invaded my nostrils, along with the smoke from a lit candle. Mrs. Winters explained, "Sometimes when we live in situations of intrigue, envy, or betrayal, negative forces accumulate. It's important for you to protect yourself. Pray the rosary. Keep your thoughts elevated. I'm going to give you a cloth bag with coarse salt and other herbs. Put it under your pillow at night and ask for protection. It doesn't guarantee that things will get resolved quickly, but it prevents evil from settling in completely." I obeyed, even without knowing if it would work. That night I placed the small bag under my pillow and prayed in Our Father and a Hail Mary in a low voice, so as not to wake Ethan and without Andrew noticing. It was the first time in a long time that I slept without nightmares. I don't know if by suggestion or by force of destiny, I began to notice strange signs around the house. Some chickens appeared dead in the yard, without marks of animal attack. Objects that I kept in a certain place appeared in another. A cold draft was present in the corridors, especially at nightfall, even when the December heat was unbearable. Several times, I woke up in the middle of the night with the clear sensation that someone was watching me. One morning, I found a piece of cloth rolled up, almost like an ornamental doll, but it had strands of hair that weren't mine. I got goosebumps, threw it all in the trash with a feeling of revulsion. Just in case, I reinforced my faith by praying every night and keeping the bag of coarse salt with me. Perhaps they were coincidences, but I was increasingly convinced that Natalie hadn't come just for business, but to destabilize my home. Her ambition never had limits, and if she wanted to ensnare Andrew, she would spare no artifice. It was during this period that I heard some stories about Natalie's past. A neighbor, Mrs. Lambert, commented that before arriving in Willow Creek, she had been involved in illicit schemes, traveling from town to town with a father who was a smuggler. Another gossip in the region swore that Natalie had closed her body with some renowned spiritual worker and used spells to obtain favors and advantages. There was no proof of anything, but gradually, the suspicion that she took advantage of both powerful people and obscure practices began to make sense, especially when strange objects started appearing in my house. The tension reached a maximum point when, on a dreary afternoon, I went to clean the room to organize the clothes and saw my husband's cell phone left there. Curiosity won me over. I opened the conversations, several messages from Natalie, some friendly, others clearly with a tone of intimacy that went beyond a work conversation. I was in shock but kept reading. In the last message, she said something like, "You don't need to stay with her out of pity. If you want, we can find a way out. My doors are open for you." I felt a stab in my stomach, almost fell to my knees from so much anger and sadness. That phrase confirmed that something already existed between them. I closed the phone and remained motionless for a few minutes. My son, playing in the living room, seemed oblivious to the storm that was forming. I took a deep breath and decided I needed to keep a cool head. If I acted on impulse, I could lose everything, including my safety and Ethan's. I waited for Andrew to arrive that same night and sat down with him at the table without my son nearby. With a trembling voice, I asked for explanations. "Andrew, I want you to be honest with me. What's going on between you and Natalie?" He tried to evade. "That's all in your head, Amber. She just has contacts to help me with the workshop. Why so much suspicion?" I took his cell phone out of his pants pocket hanging on a chair and showed it without even having to unlock the screen. I saw the messages. "Can you explain? She's talking about a way out, insinuating that you don't need to stay with me, and this part about my doors are open for you, that has nothing to do with a business partnership." He went silent, let his head fall into his hands, and breathed heavily. It was the most torturous silence I've ever witnessed. There were no tears, no shouts, just a silent confirmation of what I feared. "Amber, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. I fell into the trap of thinking she was just a friend who wanted to help. When I realized I was already involved, so you betrayed me." My voice came out low, painful. We didn't consummate anything, but we got too close. I swear, she offered me money, an investor, and I let things take a turn they shouldn't have. He couldn't look me in the eye at that moment. I felt like a bucket of ice water was dumped on me. I never imagined this could happen. I remembered my mother's advice, my suspicions, and everything was proven in the cruelest way possible. Crying softly, I said, "You need to stay away from her now if you still care about us, about Ethan. Don't let that woman step into our house again, Andrew." Andrew nodded in agreement and promised he would cut all contact. He promised 1,000 times, held my hand, asked for forgiveness. I wanted to believe it because, despite everything, I still loved him. However, I knew that trust was severely damaged. It wouldn't be overnight that I could get rid of the resentment and insecurity. The next day, Andrew tried to fulfill what he promised. He ignored Natalie's calls and messages, blocked her number, made a point of avoiding places where she appeared. I even felt temporary relief, as if a period of turbulence was coming to an end. But Natalie didn't give up. She knocked on our gate almost at nightfall, demanding to speak with Andrew. I was the one who answered. "Good evening, Amber. Is he in? I need to resolve a pending issue." "Natalie, there's nothing for you to resolve here. Go away, who are you to send me away?" She retorted in a somewhat disdainful tone. "Don't be silly, dear. I just came to deliver a contract that can help him in his career. I won't repeat myself. Leave. You've done enough damage." Damage. She looked at me as if she didn't understand. "It seems we can't even talk civilly." "Fine. Give him this message, then." And she extended a brown envelope in my direction. I didn't want to take it, but she practically threw it into my hand. Before I could react, she turned her back and left, stepping firmly. When I opened the envelope, I found only blank papers. What kind of game was that? Was she mocking, testing my limits? I decided not to tell Andrew anything, to avoid reopening the wound. I simply threw it all in the trash and reinforced my prayers that night because something told me the worst was yet to come. Andrew, aware of the tension, called a friend to assess the possibility of moving to another city where we could start over, away from gossip and Natalie's influence. I got excited, but financially, we weren't in a position at the moment. Everything was just beginning, with little money saved. My mother advised patience, saying that this girl would tire of bothering us and leave. But the weeks dragged on, and that feeling of insecurity only increased. One afternoon, an anonymous letter appeared in my mailbox, handwritten in large, misaligned letters. The text was brief. Those who mess with what's mine pay the price. Be careful with the choices you make. Not everything is resolved with prayer. My body froze. I immediately thought of Natalie or some associate of hers. But would she be capable of hiding behind an anonymous letter? Maybe she just wanted to scare me. I gathered it and took it inside, trying not to freak out. I told Andrew, who was concerned but didn't want to involve the police, as there was no evidence against anyone. He advised me to keep doors and windows locked and avoid being alone on the street at night. I was living in my own house as if I were a prisoner of fear. During that time, I repeated the ritual taught by Mrs. Winters every night, with sprigs of rosemary and a lit candle, asking for peace and protection. Though not a fervent devotee, I found some comfort in these gestures. I needed to feel supported, even if it was by something invisible. One late afternoon, while washing dishes, I heard voices in the yard. I left the faucet on and ran to see who was there. I recognized Andrew's silhouette, but couldn't distinguish the other person because of the shade of the apple trees. I approached quietly and saw that it wasn't Natalie but a man in a hat, probably a friend of hers, because he was saying, "Look, Andy, you shouldn't have cut contact with Natalie like that. You're going to end up complicating things. She doesn't like to be ignored, you know." My heart raced. Who was he? What serious matter could there be between them? I realized that Andrew was cornered, trying to justify himself. I've already said I don't want any business with her. I have a family. I'm not going to put everything at risk for a promise of investment. They continued discussing softly until the man left, leaving Andrew with a lost look. I tried to talk when he came in. Who was that? Nothing important, Amber. A guy that Natalie sent here to convince me. I'm not going to listen to this. But the fear was stamped on his face, and at that moment, something told me the situation was escaping the mere love triangle or some shady business proposal. Perhaps Natalie was involved with people who didn't care about intimidating others to get what they wanted. That thought consumed me. I began to feel even more vulnerable, as if we were all in a maze with no exit. In the midst of this turmoil came the celebrations of the beginning of the year. Normally, Willow Creek celebrates patron saints and prepares lively carnivals, but I no longer had the mindset to celebrate anything. I stayed at home taking care of Ethan and trying to deal with Andrew, who showed himself repentant but also disoriented. During this time, Natalie's figure seemed omnipresent. Sometimes I heard comments from neighbors. She's been hanging around with so-and-so or with so-and-so. Be careful, huh? It seemed that Natalie was always plotting some shortcut or advantage, and we were just another piece in this game. It was then that, on a gray morning, upon opening the door to sweep the sidewalk, I came across a package of crumpled straw tied with a red ribbon. Inside were black beads, a handful of reddish earth, and a note. I warned you. Just don't blame me for what's coming. I trembled so much I almost fell sitting on the steps. I ran inside and called my mother, who arrived in a hurry. We took all that content and burned it in the wood stove, praying to ward off any evil. But I was mentally shaken. The fear of physical aggression, or something more serious, haunted me in the days that followed. Meanwhile, Andrew, pressured by guilt and fear, said we needed to make a firm decision, either leave for good or I would start a legal process against Natalie. But we didn't have solid evidence against her beyond anonymous letters and packages. It would be her word against ours, and she would probably deny everything. Not to mention that I was emotionally exhausted, devastated. My marriage, which was once my safe harbor, was now nothing more than a shaky structure with hurts and lies choked down. My only certainty was the unconditional love I had for my son, and for him, I needed to stay standing. It was on a drizzly afternoon that the inevitable happened. I had gone out quickly to buy flour at Ted's store. Upon returning, I saw a shadow pass by the side of the house. I entered cautiously, feeling my heart pulsating in my throat. I heard voices coming from the backyard. When I approached, I came across a scene that would make anyone tremble. Natalie was there, staring at Andrew up close, as if trying to convince him of something or maybe blackmail him. And what followed was a dialogue that I engraved in my memory. "You think you can just ignore me," she was saying with a tone of anger. "I didn't leave Willow Creek. I came back to have what I deserve. I've already told you to leave me in peace. What you're doing is madness. Madness. Madness is you wanting to continue in this mediocre life, pretending everything is fine with your wife. Enough. Respect Amber." At that moment, I decided to appear and position myself next to Andrew. I spoke firmly, almost without trembling. Those who don't respect others' homes can't demand anything. You want to destroy my family. Now you've come to threaten. She looked me up and down with disdain stamped on her face. "Funny, Amber. You've always been so naive. Thought I came here just for your good." And she let out a laugh that seemed empty. Then she threw to the ground a small package, something like a fabric bag with dry branches sticking out. She made a motion to leave, but turned back, and in an almost inaudible voice shot, "If the deal doesn't go through, someone gets hurt. It's that simple." It was then that, in a flash of courage, I asked in a firm voice, "What deal is this you talk about so much? Why are you persecuting us? What do you really want?" She stared at me with coldness. "I want what was promised to me. You think I do charity. I'm in contact with people who finance big projects, and Andrew didn't honor his part." "What part?" "The part of leaving this little life and bringing his name to partnership with me. It was simple, Amber. Either he got involved in my schemes, or someone would pay the price. The choice was his, and now, by extension, yours." Those words made it clear that the investment was just a facade for something bigger, possibly illegal, and with the use of threats. My eyes welled up with anger. I wanted to pounce on her, but Andrew held me back, fearing the situation would get out of hand. Natalie walked away, disappearing through the gate. We stood there in silence, Andrew and I, with the fine rain wetting our faces. The package on the ground was falling apart in the earth, exhaling a bitter smell that turned my stomach. I went in crying, unable to speak properly. Andrew hugged me and whispered requests for forgiveness. We heard Ethan crying in the small room, frightened perhaps by the raised voices, and I ran to calm him. For long minutes, all that could be heard was the sound of rain hitting the roof tiles and my sob of despair. The feeling that something very bad was about to happen took hold of me. It was no longer just the betrayal. It was a threat to my family's integrity. The next morning, I sought Mrs. Winter's help again. I told everything, without omitting the story of the betrayal. She looked at me with eyes full of compassion and said, "My child, there are people who mess with heavy stuff, be it ill-intentioned witchcraft or envy hex. But nothing is stronger than the faith of a woman who protects her offspring. Hold this." She handed me a white ribbon, telling me to tie it on my son's wrist with a knot and pray for protection. She also gave me a new cloth bag. "Put this on the door jamb of the front door. Every time you go out or come in, make the sign of the cross. Don't let these people without light bring you down." I followed each instruction to the letter, even if someone considers this superstition. At that moment, for me, it was the only way to feel some relief. Andrew, for his part, began to support me more, saying we should do everything to ensure our safety and Ethan's. He asked for time off work and spent more time at home. After all, we suspected that Natalie might have allies. A few days later, I received the unexpected visit of a man named Gerald, who said he had known Natalie for years. He appeared one afternoon, saying that Natalie was desperate. It sounded like another form of blackmail. "Amber, I'm here in good faith. Natalie said you've been making up stories about her. Making up stories. She keeps showing up here and threatening us. Please leave my house. Look, I just want to mediate things. Natalie has influence. She can resolve things quickly if you guys agree to collaborate." Collaborate with what? There's nothing to collaborate with here. Think about it. This world is small. Sometimes it's better to keep the peace than to go around causing trouble. He left, leaving in the air the same suffocating sensation. We were being pressured to accept something undefined that I now suspected was some illegal scheme, perhaps involving smuggling, quick money, or money laundering. I went to talk to Andrew. They want money. They want us to get involved in what? I don't know, Amber. I'm as confused as you are. Maybe she wants to force me to leave you, or to invest in that project of hers. I don't know. It was disturbing because nothing seemed coherent from a moral point of view. It seemed that Natalie wanted, above all, to control us or humiliate us, taking advantage of our fragility and the supposed investment that didn't materialize. I reached my limit when one night I heard footsteps in the yard. Andrew was in the shower. Ethan was asleep. I went to check. The light from the street lamp reflected a shadow that moved slowly between the trees. I gathered my courage, opened the door slightly, and called out, "Is someone there?" I heard no response, but the footsteps stopped. A stab of fear pierced my spine. I had left a candle lit by the door that misses. Winters had recommended. Suddenly, the wind extinguished that flame. My heart raced. I went back inside without seeing anything concrete, but feeling that there was a presence around. I locked everything and tried to call the police, but the signal was poor. I spent the rest of the night on vigil. Andrew, as much as he tried to calm me, was also frightened. We thought about moving to my mother's house, but feared that would draw even more attention. From that day on, I began to sleep less and less. I heard rumors that, curiously, Natalie had been missing. They said she had traveled to resolve personal problems. The atmosphere, however, didn't improve. At any noise in the yard, I trembled. I saw shadows when I closed the curtains at night, not knowing if it was a product of my imagination or something truly sinister. Even my son, who was calm, would wake up crying in the middle of the night, as if sensing the tension in the air. In this state of nerves, a conviction arose in me. I could not continue living like this. I called Andrew for a definitive conversation. "Look, I'm leaving. I can't take it anymore. You'll still be Ethan's father. I want you to be part of his life. But I can't live in this torment. You made a mistake, you acknowledged it, but this shadow that remained between us, I can't overcome it. Amber, please don't leave me now. I'll protect you and our son. You say you'll protect me, but how? You don't even know exactly what we're being threatened with. It's been weeks that we've been living in panic." He took a deep breath and agreed that life in that place had become unsustainable. What hurt me even more was realizing that, although love was still there, trust seemed irrecoverable. And in a house without trust, love weakens more and more. I knew I needed distance, and the only person I really trusted was my mother. So I packed my things quietly, without making a fuss. I waited for a day when Andrew needed to go out to resolve documents at the registry office, and took the opportunity to gather my clothes and Ethan's. I called my mother, who came to pick us up in her old station wagon. Before leaving, I left a note for Andrew explaining that I was leaving for a while. I didn't know if it was definitive, but I needed distance to not go crazy. The first days in my mother's house were strange. I felt relieved not to be in that house anymore, but part of me cried for having left my marriage behind. Ethan, still small, was unsettled by the change of environment, but gradually got used to the new routine. My mother, extremely concerned, made a point of praying with me every day, lighting candles and asking for protection, so that Natalie wouldn't find us or send messages. In fact, it seemed she had disappeared from Willow Creek. It was only about 2 weeks later that I heard a rumor. Natalie had been seen in a ruckus at a gas station in another town. No one knew details, only that she was fleeing from collections or something like that. Hearing this, I felt a mixture of relief and pity. Deep down, I just wanted her to leave us in peace. If she was getting into trouble, it was her problem, not mine. But the bitterness of everything that happened still weighed on my chest. Andrew sought me out several times, asking to talk. I wasn't ready to receive his forgiveness or offer mine. I needed time, needed to rebuild the pieces of my security. As much as he was the father of my son, the scar of betrayal and threats persisted. I kept thinking, did he really cut ties with her or with these strange people? I decided then to seek a fresh start. Gradually, I regained contacts for accounting work, got some referrals, and began serving clients in my mother's home, improvising the living room table as an office. With the amounts I received, I saved everything to try to rent a little house. Ethan, meanwhile, grew up happy, away from the tensions that marked our last months, and my mother was a pillar of strength, cooking for us, consoling me, and always reminding me that life never gives us a burden greater than we can carry. At the end of a few months, when the dust settled and nothing more was heard about Natalie or threatening notes, I felt it was time to take a bigger step. I rented a small house near the Lighthouse Church, where I could raise my son with more freedom. Andrew approached, wanting to participate in Ethan's life, and we agreed that he would visit him regularly. I didn't resume the marriage, but we established a civilized relationship for the good of our son. Thus my life went on. Fear gave way to a desire to protect and strengthen myself. I learned the hard way that my mother's words were right. Be careful with friendships, because not everyone who calls you a friend wishes you well. I also learned that faith, even when it's not full of blatant miracles, can bring us serenity to face the worst. I still keep the cloth bag that Mrs. Winters gave me, now hanging on my house door. Whenever I go out, I touch it, a kind of amulet that reminds me of my own courage. To this day, I don't know exactly if the shadows I saw in the yard were the product of something supernatural, some spell, or pure psychological tension. Perhaps the bad energies that Natalie brought spread in such a way that I perceived manifestations everywhere. What's certain is that in that time, I felt in my skin what it's like to live haunted by fear and uncertainty. Time passed, and I never had concrete news about Natalie again. Some say she got into trouble and ended up in another region. Others claim she left the United States. It doesn't matter to me. Although the emotional scars still exist, I feel stronger than ever. Today, I work in my own accounting office that I managed to set up thanks to savings and help from some relatives. I take care of Ethan without great luxuries, but with plenty of love. And I've gone back to smiling without needing to look over my shoulder. As for Andrew, we've gone our separate ways, but peacefully. He owned up to his mistakes, and in the end, understood that bonds of trust, once broken, are very difficult to rebuild. We maintain contact because of Ethan, and gradually, the hurt gave way to a different form of respect. Life is hard, but it also gives us chances to start over. And if anything, I learned that I shouldn't underestimate the strength of a person who protects what's theirs. It takes faith to hold your head high, courage to face those who try to bring you down, and wisdom to know when to leave. When I look back and recall every detail of this story, I feel a chill that not even the Maine summer sun can melt. Sometimes it all seems like a distant nightmare. Other times, it seems that everything is still alive, throbbing, like a reminder that evil can wear many masks, including that of a childhood friend. It was by a narrow margin that I didn't end up losing more than my marriage. I could have lost my peace of mind, and who knows, even my life. Before we continue, I want to emphasize to you that I have only 2 channels, Echoes of Fear, and The Gift, Tales of Terror. Any other channel that isn't one of these 2 is just someone impersonating me to discredit my work. Thank you for your understanding, friends. Let's continue. You made it to the end of the stories. That means it's the perfect time to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you haven't already, leave a like and drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have a great time relaxing, and good night.